Chapter 289. Creak. The door to the aristocratic courtyard's tower was pushed open from the inside. The darkness of the night outside, and the lights inside merged into one. Two pink magic guiding fairies cautiously poked their heads out, as cautious as children wandering through a mansion. The feathered serpent statue at the door suddenly opened its eyes, and a bright light shot out from its vertical pupils, sweeping across the milk pot and Fairy Ibu's body in an instant. The two magic guiding fairies shrank back in fright, but when they turned to look, they found that the snake's eyes had already closed. Moo. Meow. The little ones let out a sigh of relief and quickly ran out of the door. The cold moonlight sprinkled down, illuminating half of their bodies. In the silence of the night, only the sound of the two little ones running across the bridge could be heard. But when they ran out of the tower and across the bridge, they couldn't help but stop. Almost at the same time, they turned to look at the 9-story tower. They remembered the URL. VIP Kanshu. VIP so the home they had been living in actually looked like this from the outside. Moo moo moo. The milkkin thought of its milk bottle. Meow. Fairy Ivan, on the other hand, thought of the catgrass toy. The two magic guiding fairies looked at each other, then resolutely turned around, like iron-blooded warriors rushing to the battlefield. But not long after, the two magic guiding fairies stopped. The Shungmalian castle was really too big, too spacious, and there was no familiar smell in the nooks and crannies. They half-squatted on the ground, looking up at the tall walls of the ancient castle. They suddenly felt a terrifying sense of insignificance. It was the pressure of time and history. The two little ones couldn't help but lean against each other. Only when the magic alerted them did the milkkin hastily take out a sure-kill skill card to make milk. Together with Ivan, they quickly drank a bottle each. But after each of them extended their lives, where should they go next? The milkkin hadn't thought of leaving the tower in the first place, and Ivan had only done it on a whim. They clearly didn't have a plan. Meow. Ivan suddenly had a flash of inspiration. He had an idea. Moo. The milkkin was very interested in his suggestion, and immediately nodded. Thus, the two magic guiding fairies began to run through the dusky passage. Not long after, Fairy Evie ran to the classroom closest to the Noble Academy's tower. Me. It stood at the door of the classroom and barked at the milk can that was left behind. Panicking, the milk jug pounced forward and curled up into a ball, rolling forward at an even faster speed. Meow. Fairy Evie abruptly stood up like a human. Her two ribbon-like antennae suddenly extended and blocked the rolling milk jug. However, it was too hasty after all, and before it could exert its strength, the ribbon was bent by the big milk jug. He only managed to block it for an instant. Fairy Ibu was thrown to the ground by the milk jug's outstretched limbs, rolling into a ball. Mimimi. After standing up with great difficulty, Fairy Ibu immediately scolded the milk jug. In the end, the milk jug felt guilty and didn't dare to talk back. Fairy Ibu whispered a few words into the air. Suddenly, he felt very disappointed and shut his mouth. Moo. The milkkin took the opportunity to raise his head and pointed at the classroom. Fairy Ibu cast a sidelong glance at the classroom, his interest piqued. They didn't know what class this was, nor did they know if Dake had ever taken a class inside. However, this didn't stop them from fantasizing about it. Fairy Ibu entered the classroom with his head held high and jumped onto the lectern, looking down from above. Meanwhile, the milk jug climbed onto the seat below the lectern and imitated the posture of a student. His two hooves were placed on the table, perfectly upright. It was as if one had become a professor and the other had become a student, both of them studying in the same classroom as Dake. Just this alone made them feel very happy. Only after the two little fellows each drank a bottle of milk did they leave the classroom, still unsatisfied. After that, they lost their purpose and simply wandered around the empty castle. Something happened while they wandered around. The castle in the middle of the night wasn't truly empty. Ancient golems were taking on the role of patrollers, wandering around the various floors of the castle. Although there was still some time before the 12 o'clock curfew, ever since the secret passage was sealed, the golems' patrols had become even stricter. Originally, it was only a warning before 12 o'clock, but now they began to arrest depending on the time or location. The time was after 11 o'clock. The location was near the secret passage. In the eyes of the golems, the curfew had been set half an hour earlier. Moreover, the area around the entrance to the secret passage had become a forbidden area. The milk jug and Fairy Ibu didn't have any awareness of this. No, they didn't even know the time of the curfew. Thus, when they encountered the golems on the stairs leading to the third floor, they pointed at the golems curiously and chattered for a while. It wasn't until the heavy cavalry slowly raised his 2-meter-long knight's spear and charged straight at them that they suddenly woke up and dodged to the sides. Meow. Fairy Ibu let out a short shriek in a moment of panic. The gust of wind created by the heavy cavalry charging past made its hair stand on end. He had never been the type to resign himself to adversity. With a slight turn of his head, he had already begun to condense moon force. The faint moonlight was attracted and became part of the ball of light in his mouth, gradually illuminating the surrounding darkness. Moo. On the other side, the milk jug couldn't help but cover its head. It had experience fighting against golems, but its opponent was the dragon cavalry, that was superior in function. At that time, with Dake's help it had successfully used rounding plus rolling. In the end, on the fourth rolling, it had knocked the dragon cavalry apart. Thus, it knew very well how difficult it was to deal with golems. Moon Ibu, who was also a 4-star magic guide fairy, was completely unable to cause any effective damage to the dragon cavalry. Whether it was the shadow ball or the evil wave, they couldn't hurt the dragon cavalry at all. Although this heavy cavalry didn't look as advanced as the dragon cavalry, its thick armor and height of over 2 meters made it exude an extremely strong sense of oppression. Thus, when Dake wasn't around, it didn't recommend clashing with any golems. But Fairy Ibu's moon force had already burst forth. The ball of light spat out from its mouth ruthlessly shot towards the back of the heavy cavalry. Immediately afterwards, because the heavy cavalry suddenly turned around, the snow-white ball of light hit its relatively weak shoulder. That layer of shoulder armor was immediately blasted away, and the heavy cavalry staggered a little. However, what followed closely behind was an even more ferocious attack that was like a storm. The paralysis gem on the forehead of the heavy cavalry emitted a faint light, and the lance in its hand shook out countless spear patterns. Fairy Ibu jumped left and right, relying on its greater agility to dodge in a sorry state. Its face gradually revealed the panic of losing its backbone. In the end, it was still a magic guide fairy that hadn't been born for long. Without Dark by his side, the cowardice that he should have was completely exposed. Whoosh! The heavy cavalry thrust its lance like a dragon, and a cold light flashed as it fiercely pierced Fairy Ibu's shoulder. At the critical moment, it relied on its ribbon tentacles to forcefully move to the side, but its shoulder was still cut by the tip of the lance. The burning pain from this caused it to completely wake up. But when it finally wanted to turn around and escape, the light from the yellow gem on the forehead of the heavy cavalry was already aimed at it. That was the paralysis ray, which could paralyze living creatures and slow their movements, making them easier to capture. Fairy Ibu's only advantage in agility would be completely lost once it was hit by the paralysis ray, and it could only be reduced to a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. Moo. In the nick of time, the big milk can's 4 hooves landed on the ground, and it sprinted all the way. Its curled-up body suddenly crashed into the side of the heavy cavalry, causing it to stagger at the critical moment. The heavy cavalry, which had lost its balance for a moment, released the paralysis ray, which brushed past Fairy Ibu's fur, hit the floor and dissipated outwards. Fairy Ibu took the opportunity to jump a little, finally escaping the attack range of the heavy cavalry. But the heavy cavalry, which had regained its posture, immediately aimed its lance at the nearer big milk can. The 2-meter-long heavy lance suddenly swept horizontally, its momentum like a wave, slapping the reef. Moo. The big milk can's eyes were sharp, and its body, which had already curled up into a ball, flashed with a metallic luster, surrounding its body into a glossy ball. Ding! The sound of metal colliding immediately rang out. The big milk can was sent flying by the lance, but although its magic power was slightly reduced, its rounding defense was sturdy enough, so it wasn't a big deal. Bang! After being sent flying, the big milk can fiercely hit the wall. Its limbs naturally stretched out, and it was dizzy and disoriented. Meow! Fairy Ibu's hurried call drilled into its ears. It took out a milk bottle and drank it in one gulp. The warm current that surged through its body gradually restored its strength, and it even gained a bit of vitality. Moo moo moo. After a hurried exchange, the two magic guide fairies turned around and ran towards the nearest stairs. The body of the heavy cavalry was heavy, and its width was over a meter. It belonged to the type that specialized in defense, and its movement was relatively slow. Although it moved by rolling wheels and spider legs, in reality, its relatively slender spider legs weren't enough to support its heavy body, so it could only assume the role of turning in an emergency. It wasn't like the light cavalry, which could even rely on its spider legs to climb the wall. Once the target fled up the stairs, its clumsiness would be exposed. Fairy Ibu and the Big Milkkin quickly ran up the stairs, and when they turned around, they saw that the big guy was trying hard to climb up the stairs behind them. They immediately understood that they had chosen the right strategy. But just as the two magic guide fairies were about to reveal a happy expression, the heavy cavalry, which had failed to catch up, suddenly let out a warning sound. That sharp, ear-piercing sound kept echoing in the spacious castle, causing the expressions of the two magic guide fairies to change. Mimamai. Mumumu. After a short exchange, the two magic guide fairies took to their heels and ran. This time, Fairy Ibu raised its ears high as it ran, and once there was any movement, it would urgently change direction, successfully avoiding one magic statue after another. A few minutes later, they escaped into a classroom, leaning against the wall and panting violently. Thrilling. Exciting. How exciting. Fairy Ibu took the milk bottle from the big milk can, and suddenly raised its head and poured the milk into its mouth, as if it was drinking strong wine. But the milk didn't make it drunk, but it made it drunk. Fairy Ibu suddenly coughed violently, choking on the milk. The big milkkin hurriedly came over, using all its strength to avoid hitting its back, and mooing to comfort it. After a long time, Fairy Ibu's face was flushed red as it slowly recovered. Then it collapsed in an instant. It leaned against the wall and slid down to sit, only feeling that its entire body was limp. Even its spirit was indescribably tired. It had clearly fought fiercely in the arena, and even if it had been defeated, it hadn't been this tired. Was it really because of the lack of a backbone? Mimamai Heartsuit. Moo. The two magic guide fairies reached a consensus. Go home immediately. But just as they were about to pull themselves together and move, their nerves, which had become sharp in order to avoid the magic statues, suddenly jumped. Fairy Ibu's ears instantly straightened, and it heard light footsteps slowly approaching from a distance. It gave the big milkkin a look, and the latter immediately stuck to the wall, motionless. Fairy Ibu did the same. Only the pink ribbon floated in the air, feeling the subtle fluctuations in the air. The footsteps gradually approached. Then they gradually disappeared into the distance. Its heartbeat, which had stopped for a while, finally returned to normal. Mimamai. Moo. The two magic guide fairies turned into two pools of liquid again. Moo. The big milkkin pulled at its scarf, wrapping it even tighter around its neck. It got up, pulled itself together, and prepared to end this night tour. Fairy Ibu glanced at it, then turned around and stood up as well. But when they walked out of the classroom, Fairy Ibu's little heart, which was unwilling to calm down, became restless again. Its eyes rolled around, looking in the direction where the footsteps had gradually disappeared. Mimamai. Moo moo moo. The big milkkin immediately shook its head vigorously. Mimamai. Ibu the fairy rubbed the ribbon on his face. Then it lifted its meatball and patted its chest. Mimamai. But the big milkkin still firmly shook its head. Fairy Ibu's eyebrows furrowed. After a while, one of the ribbons suddenly straightened. It seemed to have connected with something, and it called out to the big milkkin for a while. The big milkkin seemed to have been convinced. Its expression actually relaxed a little, and then it returned to the classroom. After that, the big milkkin moved its small backpack to the front, opened the lid, and took out the Surekill skill cards, activating them one by one. Bottle after bottle of milk appeared in its hands, and bottle after bottle was placed on the ground. As for itself, it only kept 2 Surekill skill. Drink milk cards. Fairy Ibu looked at the milk on the ground with a face full of joy. She stretched out her ribbon and rolled up the bottles one by one. Then she nodded at the big milk can. Moo. The big milk can gave one last order, then put on its small backpack again, and carefully embarked on its journey home. Fairy Ibu watched its back disappear around the corner. The corners of her mouth curled up, and she immediately rolled up the milk and chased in the direction where the footsteps had disappeared. It looked like Alice chasing after a rabbit. Chapter 290. Everyone knew that creatures with meat pads were proficient in stealth. After Evie and the milk jug parted ways, they silently chased in the direction of the disappearing footsteps. It was rare for it to go out, so of course it didn't want to return in such a sorry state. How embarrassing would it be if the dignified Fairy Ivan, on its first night out, was chased by a mere magic statue and ran away empty-handed. So the sudden sound of footsteps at this time was especially important. It was close to midnight, and it wasn't a magic guide fairy, so who would go out so late? Fairy Ivan had an intuition. If it followed the footsteps, it might be able to get some useful information. When it returned home and told it, it would be the dignified detective Fairy Ivan. Not only would it gain face, it would also receive a reward from its master. 1 second to remember. https://m. VIP can't you? VIP killing 2 birds with 1 stone. It was a huge profit. The wind was cold in the middle of the night, and the moonlight was cold. The milk can just happened to return to the aristocrat's tower before the midnight curfew. Under the watchful eyes of the feathered snake magic statue, it hurriedly pushed open the door and entered. The automatically lit magic guide lamp gave it a fright once again. However, when the fireplace was lit up, it revealed a joyful expression. After warming it for a while, the milkkin rubbed out a bottle of milk and drank it, then comfortably returned to the dormitory. It unlocked the door and entered the room. The warmth that hit its face made it a little teary. Returning to the embrace of paradise, it finally felt safe. Moo. I wonder how Fairy Ivan is doing? Inside the castle, Fairy Ivan relied on its silent footsteps and sharp hearing to gradually catch up to the sound of footsteps. But as soon as it got close, it suddenly felt its heart palpitate. It suddenly stopped and jumped into a corner. Immediately after, a small magic statue suddenly appeared and spun in front of it, making it almost break out in a cold sweat. Phew! When the magic statue disappeared, Fairy Ivan let out a sigh of relief and continued forward. But not long after, it found that there were more and more magic statues around it. Later on, there would be a golem guarding every section of the road, as if they were guarding some secret treasure. Fairy Evie couldn't help but recall a picture book he had seen before, and a trace of excitement appeared in his eyes. If there really was a treasure, da-da-da. The footsteps were getting closer and clearer. When it came to a corner, it was less than a few meters away from the footsteps. Fairy Evie stuck close to the wall, suppressing the excitement of being able to unravel the mystery. She suddenly stuck her head out. Me? Doubts suddenly arose in its heart. The sound was right in front of him, but there was nothing in his field of vision. Where is he? Just as this thought flashed through his mind, a strong sense of danger suddenly shrouded his heart. Fairy Ibu wanted to shrink back, but it was already too late. A small magic statue walked out from the other end of the passage, and suddenly turned its head to look at him, the gem between its eyebrows flashing rapidly. Da-da-da. The golem's alarm had not yet sounded. Fairy Ivan once again heard the sound of footsteps, and the footsteps were right in front of him. It suddenly realized. No wonder the other party hadn't touched the magic statue at all, when he'd been following them. It turned out that the magic statue couldn't see him at all. Golems guarding the treasure, stealthy thieves, and an innocent intruder. Fairy Ibu immediately filled in a whole series of stories in his mind. He had a bad feeling and promptly decided to give up on continuing to investigate. He turned around and madly ran back the way he'd come. Beep beep beep. But the small magic statue's alarm had already sounded urgently. The patrolling magic statues immediately reacted and quickly gathered in its location. As for the stealth thief, he managed to avoid the magic statue's detection, and became the one who benefited from it. Fairy Ibu had already realized that it was very likely that it had been used. The dawn star flickered high in the sky. A thin layer of ice appeared on the window. The sunlight shone on it and immediately melted. Drip. The melted ice dripped onto the balcony, creating a noise. Dake opened its eyes in a daze and habitually touched the blanket, touching a familiar coldness. The little fiend's bat wings? How did it get in? Even though he was a little puzzled, Dake didn't care too much. After he got out of bed, he walked to the side of the small bed and pulled up the little blanket that had slipped under the big milk can's stomach. Then he revealed a gentle smile. But right after that, he noticed that the other small bed next door was empty. Where's Fairy Ebu? Dake couldn't help but mutter. Fairy Ebu, who used to sleep soundly beside him, wasn't in the blanket at the moment, nor was it in its own small bed. He reached out and touched the small bed. It was ice cold without a trace of warmth. This made him involuntarily search around the dormitory. And just as he turned around, the big milk can, who had actually already woken up, quietly shrunk a little more under the blanket, revealing only a pair of dark eyes. Fairy Ebu didn't come back last night. But the big milk can wasn't worried at all. Because when Fairy Ebu decided to track him last night, it was already prepared to exhaust its magic power, and used it to convince the big milk can. Once its magic power was exhausted, Fairy Ebu would return to the magic card. It reckoned that it was still sleeping inside. As expected, just 2 minutes later. The big milk can saw that Dake's search was fruitless, so it took out Fairy Ebu's magic card to check, and began to replenish its magic power. But it didn't notice that while Dake was replenishing the magic card's magic power, his expression wasn't so good. His current state of mind was like that of a parent who found his child sneaking out to surf the internet in the middle of the night. He was angry, but he was more at ease. After all, the child had been found. As the hexagram magic replenishing array was completed, Dake began to slowly inject magic power into the magic card. From the surface of the card, it could be seen that Fairy Ebu was lying on its stomach and sleeping soundly. This was basically the long-term state that a magic fairy would be in when it was in the magic card. Other people's magic fairies were still fine. They wouldn't feel bored from staying in the magic card for a long time. Dake's magic fairy, however, was gradually unable to endure that feeling. So when it was kept in the magic card, it would automatically go into hibernation. And the hibernation state also helped to reduce energy consumption. A few minutes later, Fairy Ebu woke up in the middle of replenishing its magic power. The continuous infusion of magic power made it feel warm all over. It couldn't help but rub its fingers and call out a few times like a spoiled child. Dake's expression relaxed a little, and he immediately summoned it out of the magic card. Fairy Ebu, who had reformed its body, couldn't help but cheer and jump into Dake's arms. Dake caught it out of habit and rubbed its head hard. Then he suddenly put on a stern face and asked, "Where did you go last night?" He had originally wanted to condemn it, but Fairy Ebu raised its head with a proud look that said, "Asking for praise, asking for a pat." Dake couldn't help but feel puzzled. Mimamai. Fairy Ebu stood on its hind legs and gestured with its front legs in tandem with the ribbon. Dake was confused. He took a deep breath, and only one thought flashed through his mind. I have to speed up my literary education. Fairy Ebu didn't realize that its current actions could lead to terrible consequences, and was still gesticulating with all its might. In order to understand what it was saying, Dake took out an alphabet reading board from the teaching materials, and had it pieced together according to the pronunciation. Even though this wasn't a good idea, after spending a whole half an hour, Dake finally understood what Fairy Ebu was trying to say. Of course, in the process of narrating, Fairy Ebu directly skipped over its sorry state of being chased by the golems, and emphasized its courage and wisdom in discovering the thief and pursuing it. When Dake asked how it returned, it played it down and said that it had finished drinking the milk, and that its magic power had naturally run out. In any case, it had nothing to do with the golems. Omega. Treasure, guardian, thief, invisibility. Dake repeatedly considered these 4 keywords, and after a moment he suddenly understood. The guardian was naturally the golems. The place where the golems gathered most was definitely the entrance to the secret passage. And the so-called thief obviously wasn't the real thief, but the spies of the secret passage. As for invisibility, that wasn't a rare ability. As long as it was a senior student who had learned the magical language, it wouldn't be hard for them to create invisibility spells. In other words, there were many candidates for invisibility night roaming. It was impossible to lock onto them. But since the opponent was loitering around the entrance to the secret passage, it was best to be cautious and think that it was someone with a special purpose. From Dake's perspective, it was even more suspicious. Dake pondered for a while, and felt that this wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It doesn't matter who the invisibility person is, or what his purpose is. Just as well I can tell this to the professors, and let them have an early warning. As for Fairy Ibu, Dake walked to the small bed by the wall, and reached out with his hand to pick up the milk can. In theory, Dake supported the magical elves going out to play, or else he wouldn't have prepared the sure-kill skill. Drink milk for the milk can. But he completely didn't expect that with the milk can's temperament, it would actually go out to play right after getting the sure-kill skill card. And on the very same night, too. Is there anything you want to say? Dake narrowed his eyes and stared at the milk can. Moo. The milk can couldn't help but avert its gaze. Forget it. Dake thought it through himself. He originally wanted to educate the milk jug for abandoning Evie and returning on its own. But thinking about it carefully, the milk can's choice was based on many factors, and there wasn't actually anything wrong with it. As for the night roaming, it wasn't really wrong. The only thing that needed to be reminded was to pay attention to the closing time. The closing time is 12, don't be too late next time. Moo. The milk can hurriedly nodded. Dake rubbed the milk can's head and then smiled. Well done. The first class on Monday morning was Professor Shi-Erfa's summoning class. Dark waited until class was over before he went to look for Professor Sylph. Then, in a few words, he recounted the information that Fairy Ibu had brought him. But what surprised Professor Shi-Erfa wasn't the matter itself, but, wait, this is what your magic elf encountered when it went out for a night roam. Magic elf? Out for a night roam? Professor Shi-Erfa couldn't help but open his eyes wide. Dake nodded honestly and said, Yes, Professor. The corner of Professor Shi-Erfa's mouth twitched, and after a while, his face tensed up again. Anyway, I've already received what you said. I'll have Professor Kazair extract the relevant information from the golem. If what you said is true, I'll take care of it. Someone spying on the secret passage could be a big deal. But ever since the vampire incident, the professors had temporarily sealed the secret passage. If the other party's goal was to break the seal and find the vampire whose life or death was unknown, then they needed to pay special attention. The professors weren't afraid of vampires, but they were afraid that the related incident would affect the order of the academy. After knowing that Professor Shi-Erfa had taken this matter to heart, Dake returned to the classroom. He roughly estimated when the incident might happen this semester. For example, Easter in the first half of this year was likely to be a relatively key point. But how things would develop was not something he could guess out of thin air. It was a pity that he didn't have a talent for divination. Otherwise, he could do a divination whenever he wanted to and give himself some predictions. Therefore, it was imperative for little Ivan to learn divination. Bubyuk was not Hongi, he had a long way to go. The second class on Monday was Professor Kazair's Introduction to Magic. As soon as the class was over, Professor Kazair was called to the office by Professor Shi-Erfa. That's what happened. Professor Shi-Erfa repeated what Dake said. Professor Kazair wasn't surprised by the fact that the magic elf went out for a night roam. He thought for a moment and asked, Where's the principal? Professor Shi-Erfa couldn't help but show a hint of helplessness. You know. Okay, it's quite hard on her side. Professor Kazair shrugged. I'll go check on the golem. How dangerous is this matter? Professor Shi-Erfa pondered. Before Mitya joined the faculty, she made a prophecy about this semester. I know you don't believe in prophecies, but sometimes they are useful. Professor Kazair habitually waved his magic wand and said, You're wrong, it's not that I don't believe in prophecies. It's that the so-called prophecies are just a set path for the future. From the moment they make the prophecies, the future they see is already the past. Sometimes prophecies like that can be misleading. Professor Shi-Erfa. but you can't deny that it can also be used as a reference. Professor Kazair. That will only lead to dependence. Professor Shirfu. As long as you're careful enough. Professor Kazair. From the moment you believe in prophecies, your caution has been blinded. Professor Shirfu. Professor Kazair. Then, aren't you going to tell me about Mitya's prophecy? Professor Shirfu. Professor Kazair shrugged. I can't deny that it can be used as a reference. Professor Shirfu couldn't help but cover his forehead. Okay, Kazair. You have to know that Mitya never easily reveals the full picture of the prophecy. She just told me that the children won't be hurt, and that the hero's sword will pierce through the black fog. 2 in 1. Chapter 291. Professor Kazair's ability to act was actually very strong. It was just that sometimes, he wasn't very willing to act. Before the end of the lunch break, he had already extracted the information from last night from the golem. After skipping over the chaos caused by the 2 magic elves, he found traces of the Invisible Man. The Invisible Man was indeed wandering around near one of the secret passages. The seal at the entrance of the secret passage also showed signs of being touched. But the seal set up by the professors was not so easy to break. So the seal was still there, and the Invisible Man was not able to invade the secret passage. Is it a student or a professor? Professor Shirfu couldn't help but think. Website. https://mvipcanshu. VIP Shingmalian students had never been well behaved. Their family background also made them have their own standpoints. There were also chess pieces infiltrated by other forces in the open and in the dark. A lot of information about the academy was leaked from this. But the Shungmalian Academy was essentially a pure educational institution, and there was a hint of education without discrimination. So it didn't particularly care about the identity of the students. Therefore, if the Invisible Man was really a student, it would be very difficult to find out. But on the contrary, if it was a professor, the range of suspects would be instantly narrowed down to 2 people. Most of the professors in the academy knew each other very well. And the truth was much more credible than the students. Of course, the newcomers, Professor Ryan Hux and Professor Mitya Bartholomew, had to be eliminated. Although Professor Shirfu and Professor Mitya were old friends, she couldn't judge a book by its cover. Her relationship with Professor Mitya wasn't so good that they were close to each other. And Professor Ryan Hux was even more suspicious. Since the establishment of the Shungmalian Academy, almost all the professors had been personally selected and invited by the presidents of the past generations. Today, this had become an unwritten rule. But Professor Ryan Hux had applied on his own initiative. Although his application seemed to have a good reason, it was still suspicious. But today's matter couldn't be settled just because there was a suspect. Professor Shirfu frowned slightly. From her point of view, she couldn't just interrogate a professor that easily. Moreover, there must be a cause and effect for everything. Why did the Invisible Man want to enter the secret passage? If it was for the vampire who was most likely dead, then what was so special about the vampire? Why was it worth taking such a big risk to search for it? No, that's not right. Professor Shirfu suddenly realized something very important. She suddenly looked at Professor Kazair and asked, Kazair, have we made the matter of vampires public? Kazair was also stunned. Dake thought for a moment and roughly understood. Professor Kazair asked again. How is it? Who did you pass it to? Dake. Other than Deanna and Luosi, I don't think anyone else knows. Professor Kazair nodded. That's good. There are fewer people we need to investigate. Dake asked curiously. Professor, you suspect that it was the students who did it? Professor Kazair nodded and said, we also investigated the 2 new first-year professors, but they both had solid alibis. Professor Hicks got drunk in a tavern on Travelers Street last night. Professor Bartholomew was a guest at Little Lily's place. It's even less likely that it was the other professors. That's it. Dake couldn't help but frown. Of course, he didn't doubt the results of the professor's investigation. But in this day and age, such alibis didn't seem to count for much. The magisters were all professional magic elves. Even if they weren't there in person, There were countless ways to get in. Do you suspect that it was a substitute, a magic puppet, or a magic elven? Professor Kazair sipped his black tea. If that's the case, it'll be hard to find out. But that's something we'll have to consider when we investigate further. Tonight, I'll install concealment devices in some of the golems. If the other party insists on entering the secret passage, they'll give themselves away sooner or later. Dake nodded. The professor's thoughts were more thorough than he had imagined. They had probably called him over today just to remind him not to leak this matter to avoid alerting the other party. As for the list in his hand, Dake couldn't help but be embarrassed. It'd be great if it was really one of the students on the list. Then it might just be a simple prank, or a violation of discipline. Behind his desk, Professor Shierfa finally said, "Actually, that's not very likely. So we still need to be prepared. It's possible that the other party isn't here for the vampires." Dake thought for a moment. In that case, the search area will instantly expand to cover the entire castle. Professor Shierfa nodded. The key is that the other party didn't leave too many traces. It won't be easy to track them down. Dake asked, "Then can we use divination?" Professor Shierfa smiled. "Divination isn't that useful, Dake." "Sure enough, then we can only lure the snake out of its hole." In fact, it wasn't a big deal for the students to use an invisibility spell to wander around the castle at night. Every year, there would be a few naughty guys who would be caught and locked up. The reason why this incident was taken so seriously was because the other party was aiming for the secret passage. Now, it was a critical time for the secret passage to be sealed. Another time, at most, this would become a small topic after a meal, and it wouldn't live to see the next day. Dake assisted the two professors to conduct a certain degree of investigation on the people on the list. The final result was as expected. After the goddess incident last semester, the members of the Marine Church were all too well behaved. Due to their personalities, they didn't communicate much with their classmates. Therefore, the vampire incident that they learned from White and the others didn't spread. It was very difficult to conduct an investigation without much basic information. The plan to lure the snake out of its hole didn't work either. Since that night, no one went near the entrance of the secret passage. It was as if the operation that night was just a spur of the moment. But the investigation didn't stop. It was just that the plan changed from short-term to long-term. This week seemed to have passed in the blink of an eye. There were only 3 days left until the end of January. In addition to studying and helping with the investigation as usual, Dake almost became the big milk can's charger. Every day, he had to charge a lot of Surekill skill cards. Ever since he went out for the first time, the big milk can was never tired of it. Although he would subconsciously choose to go out in the dead of night, the legend of the pink milk cow gradually spread in the castle. Every time the big milk can went out, he would bring a magic guide elf that paid for the ticket. It was just that the ticket price dropped again and again, from 3 little red flowers to 1 little red flower. But even so, for the magic guide elf that didn't have a fixed income, it was still a very big burden. The production of consumption effectively drove the economic growth. In order to get more little red flowers, the magic guide elf's initiative in learning was mobilized. The whole economic circle began to develop in a positive direction. This phenomenon was actually beyond Dake's expectations. He was busy investigating the Invisible Man, and didn't suddenly realize until a few days later that the magic guide elf's learning progress had greatly increased. The best learner was the Diru beast. It could already spell a large part of the vocabulary, but the one with the strongest performance was the multiform monster. The multiform monster that simulated Dake's head actually used a complete human voice device to successfully speak. Although it was still limited to simple pronunciations like Papa Mama, it was already a very exaggerated improvement. It was just that the habit of transforming into Dake's head was always frightening. But in the initial stage of education, the multiform monster had a limited number of targets to imitate. For the sake of the future, Dake could only endure it. Once it succeeded, the communication problem between Dake and the magic guide elf would be completely solved. The elves clearly had different sounds, but they could understand each other's words. This was something that Dake couldn't understand, but they seemed to be such creatures. Dake was very much looking forward to the multiform monster becoming a full-time translator at home. The second last day of January. The weather was clear. Not only did the temperature not rise, but it also continued to drop. The students wrapped in thick scarves sat in the classroom of the arithmetic class. Their bodies and souls were cold. Even the little fairy, who loved to smile the most, was no longer smiling. She had a straight face from the moment she entered the classroom. Then she handed out homework, deducted marks, and explained everything in one go. This was already the third test paper that the little magisters had done. The difficulty of the questions jumped from elementary to middle school, making the little magisters, who had only studied the relevant knowledge for a few weeks, suffer unspeakably. This time, even the students of the aristocratic academy weren't spared. Their after-class professor was busy with mundane affairs and didn't have time to give them after-class tutoring last week. The increased difficulty of learning crushed the students' nerves. Everyone had a worried look on their faces. But while they were suffering, they didn't know that the little fairy on the podium was also in a similar predicament. Last week, after marking the second test paper, Professor Lily felt that there was a problem. She had the thought of finding Dake if something didn't work, and went to find her little sweetheart. But her sweetheart had been booked in advance, and didn't have time for an entire week. So when she was writing the third test paper, she unknowingly put in more effort. The result was the current situation. After the students were reprimanded twice, they finally stopped randomly filling in the blanks. There were also benefits. It saved them a lot of effort when marking the test papers. Click. The chalk suddenly broke. Professor Lily's explanation came to an abrupt end. She couldn't help but stare fiercely at the blonde boy in the corner of the classroom. That gaze was very similar to that of a resentful woman who wasn't favored. Dake Dimming was confused. The auxiliary investigation ended last weekend. This week he could finally relax a bit, so his mood was quite good. But Professor Lily's abnormal state suddenly gave him a hint of an ominous premonition. That hint of an ominous premonition. Not long after class, it came true. Dake Dimming was finally caught by Professor Lily Laplace and brought to the office. Faced with the excessive request made by the bitter Professor Lily, Dake couldn't help but be stunned. 2 in 1. Chapter 292. Dake Dimming. 12 years old. Male. First-year student at Shengmalian Academy. Currently sitting in a professor's office, writing teaching materials. Dake, do you want black tea or milk? Apple juice? Is fairy juice okay? Anything? Do you want sugar? 3 points. 7 points? 12 points. Dear Dake, why did you stop? Are your shoulders sore? Do you want little Lily to rub them for you? The scarf is too much of a hindrance, take it off. Your clothes are too thick and hinder your dexterity. Take them off too. Remember the website. MVIP can't you? 6-inch the temperature is low? Don't be afraid, Lily is here. Change. Change for me. My dear little Dake, are you hungry? Eat a piece of cake. Dake felt comfortable physically and mentally. After eating and drinking, he couldn't help but scold. Is that enough? If it weren't for the fact that each word was worth 1 credit. Enough. I'll get out of here right now. Sexy little Lily, begging for humility online. The little fairy with dragonfly wings flew lightly to the sofa and lay down comfortably. She leaned her head on the armrest of the sofa and looked eagerly at the golden-haired young man who was seriously thinking behind the desk. Her eyes were filled with hunger. The fairy's overly long lifespan always made their perception of time dull, making it difficult for them to keep up with the pace of the times. It was as if they woke up from a dream, and the outside world had already changed. Just like what she was experiencing now. Unknowingly, the teaching methods of the past had become unsuitable. The new generation of children who grew up in a comfortable environment could no longer settle down and study hard. They needed simpler and more efficient calculation methods. She was very lucky. When little Lily was about to be abandoned by the times, a hand reached out from the front and caught her rapidly falling. Lily didn't know where Dake found those calculation methods, but fairies weren't creatures who cared about these things. They were better at taking and using. Of course, after they were done, they would always give him some compensation. Therefore, Although the fairies were mischievous and willful, they had not fallen to the point where everyone wanted to beat them up. Dake Dimming, on the other hand, was bearing a weight that he shouldn't be carrying at his age. Compiling teaching materials wasn't a worry-free task. Even though the content he was working on now was not difficult, in order to make it easier for the people who received the teaching materials to understand, he needed to use relatively common language to make the most precise definitions. The use of vocabulary was very important. Every knowledge point also needed to be explained with examples. Therefore, he wrote very slowly. It had to be worthy of the price of 1,000 gold coins per word. Speaking of which, due to the consumption of the Surekill skill card, his seemingly huge amount of credits had actually shrunk by more than half. Last weekend, he was even considering whether to spend some money in the newcomers competition. Unexpectedly, it didn't take long for the credits to come knocking on his door. He was confident that the teaching material he was about to write was worth the money. However, what he was worried about was how to name the knowledge points in the teaching material. He didn't remember which mathematician summed up the knowledge points in the teaching material. Dake Dimming was very respectful of intellectual property, so he didn't want to be called a knowledge thief. After thinking carefully for a moment, he finally decided to use unknown as the mathematician's name. Thus, the legendary era of unknown mathematicians began. Time was always ruthless and cold. While Dake was immersed in writing mathematics teaching materials, while Li was immersed in reading Dake's teaching materials, time steadily moved to 1:50 in the afternoon. Dake inadvertently looked up and suddenly noticed that it was already this time. As he rejoiced in his heart, he quickly packed up the draft and hurried out of the office. It was time for class. He was the founder of the great mathematics religion, the great unknown father. In order not to be late, he ran in the empty corridor of the castle. Professor Li, who was still lying on the sofa, blinked her eyes. After a while, she suddenly flapped her wings and flew up. She suddenly turned her head and stretched out her hand, as if she wanted to catch the golden sand flowing from her fingertips. "Don't be afraid, Li. It won't be that easy this time." Li blinked her eyes and her long eyelashes kept trembling. The office was filled with the sound of wind chimes. Dak Diamond burst into the classroom on the tail of the bell. However, Professor Thompson, who was on the podium, only glanced at him and ignored him. Dark heaved a sigh of relief. He felt that one day, he would also receive the privilege of a good student. "He's late, right?" White Gouda couldn't help but mutter. "Yeah, he's late," replied Luobot Broheim faintly. After that, no one paid attention to this matter. If one were to delve into the theoretical knowledge of potions, it was actually very complicated. Just the problem of the medicinal properties of the herbs was enough to baffle a large number of people. However, the primary goal was to let the students have the ability to refine the formula after obtaining it. Each of Professor Thompson's lectures were very practical. However, he was also very accurate when he assigned homework. The students were both happy and worried. Duck, duck, potions wasn't over yet. Suddenly, Dark heard a call from the underworld in his ears. He turned his head abruptly and saw a face plastered to the glass. "You're dirty." 3 black lines immediately appeared on Dake's forehead. He thought to himself, "Looks like I can't run away." However, he didn't want to run away. 2 days in a row. Other than doing homework, Dake basically worked hard on the textbook. Other than that, he didn't have much to worry about. He was actually quite interested in the mathematics textbook, so he didn't have much to worry about. Moreover, when he rededuced some of the knowledge points, he realized that his understanding of the relevant knowledge had deepened a lot. This was how mathematics was. Every formula seemed simple, but there was a secret behind it. Every time he delved deeper into it, he would gain new insights. He was very happy about this. However, little Li was a little too clingy to please him. That actually bothered him. However, he had to admit that the fairy essence juice was really delicious. On the last day of the month, after Dake brought Ibu to astronomy class, he went back in high spirits. He went into the house and hugged the catnip plants, washed up, and crawled into bed. He maintained a comfortable mood and opened the system panel. It was the end of the month summary again. He hugged little Ibu, who took the opportunity to crawl in, and looked at the panel. Compared to the end of last month. Pride, 105-104. Jealousy, 39-38. Rage, 88-85. Sloth, 69-64. Greed, 103-100. Gluttony, 69-69. Bliss, 106-109. At first glance, the situation didn't seem optimistic. The overall numbers didn't seem to have decreased by much. However, in reality, everything was under control. January. Dake drew a total of 9 points from Pride and 6 points from Greed. In addition, he used Flower Card to reduce Bliss by 3 points. In the end, Pride gained another 8 points after losing 9 points, returning to 104 points. Greed, on the other hand, received an additional 3 points after the 6 points were drawn. The more dangerous one was Bliss. There were too many temptations in the school. As the interpersonal relationships opened up, Dake passively came into contact with the social circle. For a while, Bliss rose uncontrollably. However, with Flower Card as a backup, he didn't panic. On the contrary, jealousy, rage, and sloth all showed a downward trend. This meant that he had a good time in January and was very hardworking. Under appropriate control, gluttony didn't increase or decrease. It was ruthless. Overall, it's okay. Dake thought seriously as he enjoyed the feeling of his fingers being surrounded by soft flesh. Pride's increase was unavoidable. Bliss was the result of indulging a little. As a matter of fact, as his research deepened, his understanding of great sin became clearer. He would no longer increase bliss just because he wanted to pinch Diana's flesh, unless he wanted to indulge in it consciously. He had a rough plan for his research. In February, greed needs to be drawn 3 times 5 points each time. A total of 5 points. Plus the 3 points stored in the insect tree, it'll be 5 points. I can use it to cultivate the fruit of greed. I'll still have 5 points left. The remaining 7 days can be used to draw, pride, and bliss. As for the amount of each, it's still to be decided. I can draw 3 points of bliss first to lower the value. After that, I'll consider cultivating the fruit of bliss, or the fruit of pride. The core materials I have are Dragon's Reverse Scale, Wind Spirit, and Ancient Gold Coin. The technologies that I haven't mastered are Zoo and Triad Armament Array. My original plan was to start learning about wood carving in February, but now it seems that I have to start writing textbooks first. The writing of textbooks is indeed a problem. Although the reward of 1 credit per word is good, the cost of time is also very expensive. If I spend all my time writing textbooks, no matter how many credits I earn, it'll be putting the cart before the horse. It's enough for a semester's worth of mathematics textbooks. Excluding the exercises and the embellishments, it should be around 50,000 words. 50,000 credits, that's just the number of 5 fingers. Using a month's time to earn 50,000 credits, it's still worth it. Early February. Winter went and spring came. However, there were no signs of winter in the castle. Dake put down the newspaper and took a sip of the hot milk. He sniffed the rich milk fragrance and gradually felt comfortable. Humans were creatures controlled by emotions. However, emotions were substances that could be controlled by humans. From this month onwards, the first-year mathematics class would start using the textbooks he wrote. However, in the eyes of Professor Li, the content was not only too simple, but also a bit redundant. However, it was indeed content that beginners needed to learn step by step. However, the textbook was still in the experimental stage and only 1 chapter was written. Therefore, it could not be printed into a book yet. After the entire Mathematics 1 textbook was written, it could be distributed to everyone. To be honest, it was too difficult to teach arithmetic without a textbook. The feeling of reading a textbook and a notebook were really different. Dake's knowledge level was enough to meet the requirements of the first-year textbooks. Plus, with the help of Professor Li, he was able to finish writing a textbook. Maybe the 2nd and 3rd years would be able to do the same. However, he was not sure if he could go any further. Also, he always felt that if he continued to write Mathematics 1, it would give people the impression of simplified arithmetic at the beginning, but it would fast forward to deepened. He only hoped that when that time came, the students would not blame him. He was just a lowly writer who had sold his soul for academic credits. Thursday's mathematics class. Professor Lily floated into the classroom with a copy of Dake's original manuscript. She was full of confidence. Today, she was going to be bold and decisive and sweep away the haze. She wanted the students to see that Lily Laplace's mathematics class could be understood. The students seemed to have felt Professor Lily's new look. They could not help but feel energized. It was as if they were on the battlefield. Dake, who was sitting in the corner of the classroom, picked up a pen and prepared to adjust the textbook content according to the actual class situation. Since he had already started writing textbooks, he obviously could not be satisfied with just using the textbooks for personal use. The current goal was to let the freshmen of St. Marian be forever stained with the color of anonymity. Noon. Dake and Professor Lily were in the office discussing the content of the class. Professor Lily also began to write a corresponding exercise book under Dake's suggestion. The first exercise book had already been published during the morning mathematics class. Also, Dake introduced the homework model. He allowed the students to do their homework in class and proofread, and explain it in class instead of just giving them homework after class. Also, Dake had a suggestion about homework grading. He wanted the students to exchange homework and grade each other's homework. Malian students valued honor much more than the average person. Simply put, they valued their reputation more. This way, the students would pay more attention to the completion of their homework and further deepen their understanding of the content by discovering other people's mistakes. Of course, this would also reduce the professor's burden. And Dark wouldn't always be called upon to help grade homework equals. In short, the optimization of the mathematics class was carried out in an orderly manner. Unfortunately, Professor Shierfu and Professor Ka Zayer's investigation of the Invisible Man was not ideal. Even the various perceptual traps at the entrance of the secret tunnel did not yield any results. It was as if the Invisible Man had really turned invisible and never appeared again. Even though they tried their best to keep it a secret to avoid alerting the enemy, it still seemed like they had shocked the enemy. They had to start thinking of a new strategy. The third night of February, Dake did his third draw of the month and finally increased greed to 5 points. He began to cultivate the fruit of greed. 2-in-1 looking for monthly votes. I stayed up all night to write today's update code. I'm going to go out after a short nap. I won't be back until tomorrow afternoon. I hope I can see the skyrocketing number of monthly votes when I come back. Open the letter with a skyrocketing mood, and there will be an era. Asterisk. Chapter 293. Dake had been thinking about the cultivation of the fruit of greed for a long time. Until now, the fruits of great sin he had cultivated were pride, bliss, and greed. Among them, he used the fruit of pride to create the Diru beast, and the fruit of bliss to create the big milkkin and fairy Ibu, which gave him a deeper understanding of the sins. Now that the time had come, it was time to deepen his research on greed. The cultivation of the fruit of greed and the refinement of the corresponding magic elves were the key. Dake placed the 3 cat grasses in a row. From left to right they were cat grasses, cow grasses, and fox grasses. These 3 cat grasses had already cultivated the fruit of great sin. Dake was actually more worried about whether this situation would have a residual effect on the cultivation of the new fruit. However, when he used the Great Sin card, he had already discovered that different types of Great Sin card would not have an overlapping effect other than emotions. In a sense, they were independent of each other. Moreover, the low-level Great Sin card and the high-level Great Sin card were almost fundamentally different. The overlapping of the same low-level Great Sin card could not cross levels. Remember, https://m, VIP can't you? VIP of course. This was only a conclusion made under the circumstances where there was no external influence. Perhaps there really was a way to fuse the Great Sin card, like the fusion card with the magic elf. However, he did not have such a clue at the moment. Therefore, he roughly guessed that cultivating different types of fruit of Great Sin would have no effect on the cat grasses. Or rather, There would be an effect, but the effect would not be huge. Most of it would be limited to the establishment of a character. For example, there would be a little more pride in addition to greed. Thinking about it carefully, would pride's greed give birth to a character similar to the ancient chivalrous bandits, neither rich nor poor? Needless to say, it was quite interesting. Dake touched his chin and thought for a while. In the end, he still picked up the leftmost cat grasses. Dake had always been especially fond of this cat grasses that he had spent the most time with. He would leave the heavy responsibility of having a second child to it. Since it was the fruit of greed cat, which core material should he choose? Dake already had an answer in his heart, but he wanted to think about it more carefully. However, this did not stop him from cultivating the fruit of greed. After finalizing the deal, Dake waved at the milk can and asked it to take care of the milk cow grass and fox grass. Then he carried the cat grass to the balcony. He had already injected all 3 days of greed into the worm tree's branches, including last month's reserves, a total of 7. 5 points of greed was divided into 5 portions and stored in the 5 insect branches. The kitty grass in his arms saw him reach out to open the protective fence of the insect tree, and immediately meowed excitedly. It had been eyeing this branch for a long time. It had been a long time since it was allowed to touch the insect branch. It had been so long that it had almost forgotten the smell. Meow 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 meow. Kitty grass waved its meatball impatiently. Dake smiled and retracted his hand to pinch its face. Then, he carried it to one of the thick branches so that it could suck on the mushroom-shaped branch after sticking out its little tongue. Slurp. The kitty grass was attracted by the smell of sin mixed with the insect branch, and stretched its neck to lick it. After it had licked the branch until it was wet, Dake moved closer so that it could hug the branch and suck with all its might. Looking at the kitty grass sucking with all its might, Dake's expression could not help but melt. It was not until the kitty grass had licked all the greed stored in the branch that Dake pried its claws and pulled it away from the branch. Meow meow meow. Even though the kitty grass was very reluctant, it could not resist its master's coercion. Dake waited for a few minutes to give it time to absorb and convert the greed. Not long after, a very faint greed emblem appeared on top of the kitty grass's head. In the center of the emblem, a small protrusion drilled out and slowly sprouted. Dake vaguely remembered that he once did a diary homework of observing the growth of XX plants. If the plants back then also had this kind of growth rate, when the bud gradually grew, Dake grabbed the kitty grass's claws and shook it a little. Then he carried it back to the insect tree and allowed it to suck on the second branch. This second branch only stored 2 greed points. However, after the kitty grass absorbed the 2 greed points, the bud on top of its head gradually grew a stem and a flower bud. The light blue flower bud was budding and emitted a hallucinatory smell. The third branch only had 1 point of greed stored in it. After this round of licking, the greed on top of the kitty grass's head finally bloomed. The color of its petals gradually deepened and turned into a deep dark blue. The stamen in the center of the flower was a bright purple. It was as if all the light was swallowed by the petals and then transferred to the stamen. It's 6 o'clock. Dake was not in a hurry to let the kitty grass absorb the last greed point. Instead, he picked up a pen and paper and drew the entire process of the greed, from germination to blooming. In the end, he even relied on his imagination and directly drew the final result in advance. Looking at the greed that he imagined, Dake smiled and let the kitty grass pounce on the 4th branch. The 5th branch was at the top of the insect tree and perfectly avoided the kitty grass's hunting range. The 0.5 greed point would be used as a rare reserve for the next experiment. After the kitty grass absorbed the 1 greed point in the 4th branch, it immediately aimed at the 5th branch above its head. However, its owner heartlessly took it away from Shui, who it desired the most. He even used the annoying guardrail to separate it from Shui, so it could never touch her again. Meow. The kitty grass's mouth was blocked by Dake's finger. The kitty grass that took advantage of the situation to bite Dake's finger quietened down instantly. The greed on its head bore fruit smoothly. The ovary of the stamen began to expand, and the ovules developed rapidly. The dark blue petals withered at a speed visible to the naked eye. A fruit the size of a ping-pong ball gradually grew. Dake observed the greed that was 70% to 80% similar to his idea. He reached out and touched it slightly, carefully feeling the greed aura that was gradually getting stronger. A moment later, the greed was completely ripe. It was a fruit that looked like a fig, but its skin was a transparent dark blue. The purple veins that seeped out from the skin formed a natural heraldic pattern, revealing a hint of mystery. After plucking the greed, only a thin stem was left on the top of the kittygrass's head. This thin stem that looked like a strand of hair was actually a very useful material. Back then, when the ball sea lion was refined, 2 bliss stems were used. It was also after that Dake cut off the other, pride stem, of the kittygrass and had been carefully storing it. The greed stem in front of him might come in handy at some point. Dake's eyes wandered slightly. In the end, he gave up on the idea of cutting off the greed stem immediately and walked back into the room with the fruit. Then he called Kettle over and put the greed fruit into Kettle's hole. "I'll leave the rest to you." Kettle's method of brewing the grapes in fruit before using it was tested before. Although he couldn't be sure if the brewing effect would increase, he felt like he would lose something if he didn't squeeze out the fruit. Busy. Kettle raised its head confidently, as if to say, Kettle's product must be the best. Kettle needs about 30 minutes to dissolve and ferment the grapes in fruit. Let's prepare for the experiment first. Dake handed the kittygrass that gave birth to the second child to Big Milk Can and went to the experiment table to prepare. The mother this time is a cat, and the other core material. The most compatible material with the greed stem is the ancient gold coin that AI Ma gave me. The target of the refinement is temporarily set to be a normal type, but I don't know if it will be as I thought. Dake knocked on the table and thought for a while. Then he took out the ancient gold coin and soaked it in the prepared potion. Then he started to prepare according to the refinement method of the bird and beast species, normal type. Half an hour later, everything was ready. The fermentation of the greed fruit was also completed smoothly. Dake poured the juice of the greed fruit into a beaker and started the refinement process. Once he was immersed in the refinement process, his attention would be very focused. Almost all the distracting thoughts unrelated to the experiment would be temporarily discarded. In such a state, when he repeated the refinement process of the bird and beast species, normal type, there would be almost no mistakes. From the application of the fairy honey to the carving of the first refinement array, the process went smoothly as expected. Dake checked the status of the magic card one last time before activating the first refinement array. With the successful activation of the first refinement array, the experiment was only left with the addition of the materials and the absorption and refinement. Dake picked up the juice of the greed fruit and shook it slightly. The purplish-blue juice swirled like a nebula. He tilted the beaker and slowly poured the juice into the light array of the first refinement array. The light array flickered quickly and absorbed the juice. After the juice was poured in and the light array gradually stabilized, he took the ancient gold coin out of the potion, shook it dry, and put it directly into the refinement array. This ancient gold coin came from the super ancient era. The front side of the coin was engraved with the bust of a certain king, and the back side was engraved with a pyramid-like structure. Its value had long surpassed the value of the gold coin itself. After the refinement of the first refinement array, the sedimentation of history and the brand of civilization were all transformed into the components of the magic fairy. Not long after, the first refinement array emitted an extremely bright golden light, illuminating the surroundings with a golden color. The magic card that had been refined was then wrapped up by the golden threads transformed from the golden light, forming a golden cocoon of light. Dake reached out to touch it and injected magic. As a large amount of magic was absorbed, the light on the surface of the cocoon of light gradually stabilized. Dake's expression was slightly serious. He could feel that the refinement this time was still going smoothly. A brand new magic fairy was being born. This gave him a sense of solemnity, as if he was creating life. In the past, when he was refining magic fairies, he did not have such a solemn feeling. However, as he became closer to the magic fairies, he could no longer treat them as simulated life forms like the golems. And the change in perception would eventually bring about changes. The The magic fairies who had been paying attention to his experiment suddenly felt something and shifted their gazes from the cocoon of light to him almost at the same time. Their eyes showed confusion, doubt, infatuation, and contemplation. Dake took out a mercury knife from the tool rack, aimed at the center of the cocoon of light, and carefully cut it open. It was like performing a cesarean section. Sacred, sublime, golden light constantly shot out from the cut gap. When the entire cocoon was cut in half, the cocoon of light suddenly turned into golden liquid, and was immediately absorbed by the magic card, leaving no trace of impurities. There was no need to rinse. The magic fairy on the card surface was clearly visible. A golden halo surrounded the magic card, indicating its preciousness and rarity. The newly born magic fairy was the embodiment of greed and gold, the amalgamation of cunning and intelligence, the Pokemon with strong self-esteem. Meow meow? Dake could not help but show a hint of astonishment. This was an answer that was in line with his idea. But it was subtly different from his idea, because this meow meow was a gray skin that he was not familiar with. Card name, meow meow. Type, fairy card. Level, *****. Race, bird beast. Attribute, evil. Magic power, 1500. Attack, 1500. Defense, 900. Ultimate skills, technical expert, treasure gathering technique, thief, deception. He used the refining method of bird beast type, normal. But the final refining result was bird beast type, evil. The subtle difference was just like the difference in its form. Dake's impression of Meow Meow was that of a cute and charming villain with light yellow fur. But this Meow Meow in front of him had gray fur. Its eyes were half closed, and the corners of its mouth were slightly raised, revealing a trace of contempt and cunning. This appearance, could it be Meow Meow from Ashmola? Pokemon would occasionally take on different forms depending on the environment of the region. In Ashmola, Meow Meow was an evil gray cat. In Galar, Meow Meow was a steel big-faced cat. Dake did not know much about this, and he could only guess from his vague memory. His initial refining target was the normal Meow Meow of the normal type. But he did not expect the final result to deviate from his expectations. But the Meow Meow in Ashmola seemed to be more in line with his expectations of the magic fairy's personality. I don't know if it's good or bad. Looking at the evil smile on Meow Meow's mouth, Dake could not help but frown. 2 in 1. After sitting in the car for a long time, my head hurts a little. Maybe it's reminding me that it's time to sleep. Chapter 294. Alright. Dake picked up Meow Meow's magic card and accepted reality. If he did not like the color of its fur, he could dye it. If there was something wrong with its personality, he could train it. There was nothing that could not be changed. For a magic elf, the most important thing was its attributes, 3 measurements, and skills. When a magic elf used skills of the same attribute as itself, its abilities would be enhanced. Therefore, it was very important to match the attributes and skills. It was evil. Among the 4 lethal skills of Meow Meow, thief and deceit seemed to be evil. Dake inserted a trace of magic into Meow Meow's magic card. Very soon there was a feedback. First of all, first website. https://m. Vipcanchu. VIP. This was obviously a gold card. The golden halo surrounding the edge of the magic card was a symbol of its rarity and preciousness. Second of all, this was a 3-star card. This was something that Dake did not expect. He had thought that the magic elf refined using the fruit of great sin would have a 4-star base. He did not expect a 3-star card to appear this time. However, 3-star cards had their benefits. It was very useful for enriching the card deck. Moreover, the 3 measurements of Meow Meow were strong enough. Although it did not break through the limits of magic attack and defense, it won in balance. In theory, the magic power and attack value should not appear on a race like Meow Meow that gave people the impression of being weak. However, Dake had already discovered that on the same level, the star level of a magic elf was more like the level in a game. This could be seen from the fact that the changeable monster could increase its star level after using the Great Sin card. The 3 measurements of Meow Meow were so high. It could be understood that its level was very high. This was the same reason that Ivan could also increase to 2-star after using the Great Sin too. The The three measurements of a level 50 Meow Meow and a level 10 Meow Meow were definitely different. However, the strength of a magic elf card ultimately depended on the lethal skills. Meow Meow, who had 4 lethal skills, had a huge advantage in this aspect. As long as there was a divine skill among the 4, it was enough to support it to become a strong card among the 3 stars. Dake looked carefully. Aside from the treasure-gathering art, the rest of Meow Meow's killing moves were unfamiliar to him. Treasure-gathering art should be the skill that had the highest compatibility with greed and ancient gold coin. It was also the ultimate skill that he had expected from the start. However, the description of this sure-kill skill seemed to be slightly different from what he had imagined. Treasure-gathering art. Meow Meow summons a large number of gold coins from the gold coins on its head and tosses them at the opponent. Deals damage based on the number of gold coins. Treasure-gathering skill. Additional effect: Meow Meow attracts wealth and treasures. Occasionally, it will obtain rare treasures. It's a throwing-killing skill, but the damage is determined by the number of gold coins. But there must be a limit to the number of gold coins that can be summoned. In my impression, the treasure-gathering art is not a powerful unique skill. The power setting in the Pokemon game seems to be only 40. Dake couldn't help but ponder. Basically, a sure-kill skill like this can't even compare to a magic elf's normal attack. At most, it'll change from a melee attack to a ranged attack. This means that most of the time, this sure-kill skill is only suitable for scraping. But its core is obviously not the attack, but the treasure-gathering art that comes after. Meow Meow attracts wealth and treasures. Occasionally, it will obtain rare treasures. What does this mean? Is it a treasure that fell from the sky, or is it money that I picked up when I went out? I have a feeling that this might be a surprise. But there was no point in just thinking about it. He temporarily suppressed the urge to immediately verify it, and continued to look at the next sure-kill skill. Technique Expert was a passive skill that originated from Meow Meow. It was the same type as Ibu's Charming Body and Big Milk Can's Herbivore. Technique Expert. Meow Meow is a natural technique expert. When using a less powerful sure-kill skill, its power will increase by 50%. So this is a technique expert? Is the treasure-gathering art considered a less powerful sure-kill skill? It should be. If it is, the treasure-gathering art's power will increase by 50%, from 40 to 60. Ha! Dake laughed dryly and then began to think deeply. The name of the sure-kill skill, Technique Expert, might very well mean that Meow Meow is extremely talented in technique. Dake couldn't help but think of the special Meow Meow in Pokemon. Not only could it speak, but it could also create all kinds of high-tech items. It was simply a god. If my Meow Meow could be that powerful. Slurp. He couldn't help but think. I can't fantasize anymore. I'd better continue to study the remaining sure-kill skills. Thief and Deceit, as expected of evil skills. Just their names reveal an evil aura. Thief, empty-handed thief. When attacking, it steals items. When it already has items in its hands, it cannot steal. Obviously, Thief was a sure-kill skill similar to Ibu's Desire. Both could steal items from the opponent. And its power was similar to Desire, only at 60. With a power of 60, even if it was increased by 50% by Technique Expert, and with the bonuses of its own element, it was only close to Ibu's Moon Force. Although it wasn't particularly powerful, it was still passable. The core of this sure-kill skill was still the additional effect of stealing items. Overall, it was a very good sure-kill skill. The last sure-kill skill, Deceit. Deceit. Borrowing the opponent's strength to attack. The higher the opponent's attack, the greater the damage. Gugusu Morong Meow? Without a doubt, this was a true godly skill that was completely compatible with the gold card. Just from the description alone, it could be seen that it was very similar to Kettle's series of skills. They were roughly of the same type. Both would become stronger when faced with a strong opponent, giving someone a taste of their own medicine. But Meow Meow's Deceit was more direct than Kettle's cantrips in terms of skill mechanics. It was the nemesis of offensive magic guiding fairies. If that was all, it wasn't impossible. After all, The sure-kill skills of magic guiding fairies were limited by the ladder. The effects of skills that crossed the ladder would be weakened. Under normal circumstances, if the skill crossed 2 ranks, the effects of the skill would be almost useless. But the magic guiding fairies that Dake had refined were of a higher level than normal magic guiding fairies. Moreover, the gold card clearly had a certain uniqueness, which made it possible to cross the ladder. After carefully digesting all the information, Dake silently chanted, "Normal summoning." Under the watchful eyes of the magic guiding fairies, he began to summon, meow meow. In the name of Dake Dimung, magic guiding summoning. A layer of golden light that was slightly inconsistent with Greed's bluish-purple color lit up on the magic guiding card. Meow meow emerged from the card's surface and took shape amidst the light. The incarnation of Greed and Gold Coin. The gray cat with an oval gold coin stuck to its forehead, breathed in the air of this world for the first time. It had soft gray fur. Only its ears, the front half of its feet, and a part of its tail were white. It was only 0.4 meters tall, making it as petite and cute as a house cat. Although Meow Meow was an elf that could walk upright on 2 legs, most of them actually walked on 4 legs. Dake's Meow Meow was no exception. It had just come into contact with this world, and there was still a trace of innocence on its face. There was none of the slyness on the card's surface. But when it got a little more familiar with this world, its fundamental personality would gradually emerge. Meow, Meow Meow opened its eyes and looked around. There was already intelligence in its eyes. The magic guiding elves that were refined using the Fruit of Great Sin did not need the Great Sin card to activate their intelligence. They were already the incarnation of great sins, and their innate intelligence was higher than normal. It was almost instinctive. Meow Meow met the eyes of the Dilu beast on the cat tree at the first moment. The gray cat and the white cat. Greed and arrogance. Although there was no irreconcilable conflict between black and white, it was definitely not harmonious. But the Dilu beast just snorted lightly and focused on its own literacy picture book again. Tisk. Meow Meow, who felt that it was being looked down upon, couldn't help but open its mouth. Its big round eyes were half closed, hiding its true heart deep in its eyes. Then it stood up from the ground, raised its claws slightly, and stretched out a sharp nail. But before it could do anything, its feet suddenly floated in the air. The expression on its face collapsed in an instant. It turned its head abruptly to look at the person behind it who used both hands to support its armpits and lifted it without permission. In that instant, his collapsed expression melted as if it was a magic trick. Meow, the soft meow of the cat gave people goosebumps. After Dake lifted Meow Meow up, he turned it over and looked it up and down, left and right, then said, "You don't like it?" Meow. Meow Meow quickly shook its head. "Dake, that's good. I thought you had something against your birth." Meow Meow, meow. "Dake, if that's the case you can only be remade." Meow Meow. Meow Meow Meow. "Dake, fortunately it's not." Meow Meow. Meow Dake, I'm joking. Meow Meow. Meow. Dake smiled and observed Meow Meow's reaction. After all, Meow Meow was just born. No matter how smart it was, without enough accumulation of knowledge, it was still somewhat lacking. And it was obviously not guarded against Dake, who was its master. If it was properly educated, it wouldn't go down the wrong path. Unfortunately, Meow Meow's information wasn't recorded in Paradise, so it couldn't live in the dormitory for a long time like other magic elves. Although there were 6 chances to record information in Paradise, he couldn't use up one of them just for one magic elf. According to Dake's expectations, he would need at least 10 new magic elves to record information in the second time. Before that, if he wanted Meow Meow to be able to move around for a long time, creating zoo as soon as possible would be a more practical way. But obviously, now wasn't the time to think about the future. After being intimate with Meow Meow for a while, Dake began to experiment on Meow Meow's various skills. He mainly experimented on whether Technique Expert would work on other sure-kill skills, and whether Thief could steal item cards. The results of the experiment were quite satisfactory. So far, the effects of Meow Meow's 4 sure-kill skills were similar to Dake's judgment. What he couldn't verify, other than Meow Meow's talent in learning techniques, was the additional effect of treasure-gathering technique. Attract wealth and gather treasure. I can't let Meow Meow walk around and see if it can pick up money or something, right? Come on, there's no currency in the academy. After many fruitless attempts, Dake understood that he could only wait for the traces to show in the future before he could reconsider the additional effect of treasure-gathering technique. After that, Dake took out the magic card of the Great Sin series and experimented on Meow Meow. The focus of this experiment was Bliss 3 and Pride 3. Bliss 3 and Pride 3, respectively, had the effect of allowing Ivan and the Little Fiend to evolve into 4-star magic elves. And Meow Meow was only 3-star. So he needed to confirm whether Bliss 3 and Pride 3 could evolve it. The results were obvious. Bliss 3 and Pride 3 didn't have a significant effect on Meow Meow. Bliss 3 made Meow Meow an unusually clingy little cutie. Pride 3 only made it more reserved. Under such circumstances, Dake's first thought was to refine Greed 3 and see if Greed 3 could make Meow Meow evolve into Cat Boss. But refining Greed 3 required a full 10 points of greed. This month, although there were still 5 points of the draw quota, it obviously couldn't be used on greed. And the current greed index was only 95. 5 only 5 points more than the standard 95. How to control the increase of greed in a controlled manner was actually not a small issue. It wasn't as easy to deal with as Bliss. Therefore, the ideal situation was to start crafting Greed 3 next month. And the next plan for this month was to first descend Bliss. After the experiment, Dake had no choice but to put Meow Meow back into the magic card. Although his magic power recovery speed was actually enough to support Meow Meow's activities for a long time, this kind of behavior was not a solution to the root cause and was not significant. Instead, it was better to let it be sharpened in the magic card. Dake gave it to the trash slime. Meow Meow's magic card formed the head. The trash slime formed the body. Unexpectedly, they complemented each other. The magic elfin could move in the magic card. Although it would consume magic power, the consumption was very low. Meow Meow that formed the head kept meowing, but the trash slime that formed the body actually couldn't understand the elfin system's meowing. This was the essence of Dake giving it to the trash slime to take care of. If it was allowed to live comfortably, then what kind of sharpening was it? No matter whether you were greed or pride. If you wanted to act as you pleased, you had to learn to communicate with the trash slime patiently, or learn to communicate with other elfins in a friendly manner. In short, there was an additional student with a subtle appearance in the kindergarten of the Aristocrat House 201. Chapter 295. Dake cleaned up the remnants of the experiment and went into the bathroom to take a shower. When he came out, he saw Garbage Slime slowly wriggling around with Meow Meow's magic card on its head. Garbage Slime seemed to like this job very much. It kept strolling around the bedroom with Meow Meow. Polymorph, who had always treated Garbage Slime as its own, looked at it gently. It was surprisingly harmonious. Polymorph. Dake wiped his hair with a towel and said, "Busy." Polymorph immediately turned its head and looked at him curiously. Dake pointed at the teaching materials on the desk and said casually, "How about I leave Meow Meow's teaching task to you?" Polymorph tilted its head and thought for a while. Its body suddenly wriggled and stood up, turning into a small-eyed Meow Meow. Then it patted its chest and nodded. "Meow Meow Meow." Dake nodded happily and said, "Then I'll leave it to you. Teach slime while you're at it. It can't keep up." Polymorph. Busy Meow Meow. The next day, Sunday. In the afternoon, Dake was continuing to write teaching materials when a light breeze blew a paper crane into the dormitory. He reached out and took the paper crane. He opened it and his heart skipped a beat. He packed his things and went out. A few minutes later, he arrived at Professor Shi-Erfu's office. In the office, Professor Shi-Erfu and Professor Kazair were already waiting inside. Although the two of them had not made any progress in the search for the Invisible Man, they did not seem to be in a hurry. When Dark entered, he saw them playing magic chess, which was a rare sight. Dake was actually very interested in magic chess. However, he was worried that he would not be able to control himself if he indulged in it, so he deliberately did not learn it. However, when he saw Professor Shierfu and Professor Ka-Zair playing magic chess, he could not help but go up to them. Magic chess was a chess game similar to Warbeast chess. There were 21 pieces on each side, and each piece had a corresponding attack, defense, HP and ultimate skills, as well as the number of moves they could make per turn. In every round, players could choose to throw a piece, or manipulate a piece to move. By placing chess pieces in one's own territory and moving one chess piece every turn, they could advance, attack and kill the opponent's chess pieces. In the end, they could kill all the opponent's chess pieces or occupy the fortress to obtain victory. In the past, Magic Chess had a fixed set of 21 pieces, but recently, there seemed to be some new pieces, which set off another wave of craze. Players could purchase new Magic Chess pieces from the Twisted Eggs and construct their own Magic Chess formations. Just like the duel cards, it was very fun. Some rare Magic Chess pieces would have additional value, and the transaction price would be very shocking. Of course, it was inevitable that there would be a distinction between pirated and authentic versions. Pirated Magic Chess pieces were usually unofficial and inferior products. In order to distinguish the original Magic Chess from the pirated version, the bottom of the chess piece was engraved with an official coat of arms that was difficult to replicate. The Magic Chess pieces used by Professor Shierfu and Professor Ka-Zair were brand new ones that Dake had never seen before. The chess pieces on both sides were very powerful, and they were fiercely attacking each other on the small chessboard. The Magic Chess pieces rose and fell, and they were constantly killing each other. In the end, Professor Ka-Zair was one step ahead. He killed Professor Shierfu's elf queen and successfully occupied the fortress. Phew! Professor Ka-Zair was relieved. He picked up the teacup on the side and wanted to take a sip, but he didn't realize that the teacup was already empty. Professor Shierfu was obviously disappointed. She straightened up and turned to Dake. "When did you come?" Dake smiled. "I've been here for a long time. Why are you playing magic chess?" Professor Shierfu put down the chess piece and said with a rare smile, "You won't believe me. I just learned it." Professor Ka-Zair also smiled. "I recommended it." Dake. No wonder you can win. However, he didn't expect Professor Ka-Zair to have such a hobby. He had never seen it before. Professor Ka-Zair seemed to see his confusion and said casually, "I've lived for a long time, so of course I know how to play magic chess. It's just that the fixed 21 chess pieces were too boring, so I didn't pay much attention to it. I didn't expect the Magic Chess Guild to come up with new chess pieces, so I wanted to give it a try." Professor Shierfu continued, "This is indeed a breakthrough. With new chess pieces, the strategy of magic chess has become more varied. It's not like in the past, when you only needed the backboard. And some of the new chess pieces are very creative. Let's talk about business." She sighed and pushed the chess piece away. Dark, on the other hand, moved a chair over and sat down between the two of them. He said, "Professor, is there any progress?" Professor Shierfu said, "I'm worried because there's no progress." Dake asked curiously, "Is there no immediate solution?" Professor Shierfu shook his head. "It's not like in the past." What he meant was that there were methods that could be used, but they couldn't be used. Some methods that could be used in special times were taboo in peacetime. It was very difficult to catch a person who hadn't shown up from the beginning to the end using conventional methods. Dake nodded slightly and didn't ask any more questions. Professor Shierfu had asked him to come over to discuss how to find the person within the rules. She continued, "The problem now is that we have too little information. We don't even know why the other party is spying on the secret passage. We have no clue at all." Professor Ka-Zair said humorously, "That's the hardest part. It's like we're looking for someone who doesn't even exist. But since we can't find him, we have to find another way. For example, we have to make him come out himself." Professor Shierfu looked at Dake. "Luring the snake out of its hole, is that what you mean?" Dake nodded and said, "Maybe the seal of the secret passage really stumped the other party, so he hasn't moved yet." Professor Shierfu said, "That's a possibility. But we can't open the seal of the secret passage just because of this. Also, That would leave too many traces. Dake thought for a bit and said, but if we want to lure the person out without opening the seal, we have to know why the other party is spying on the secret passage. Professor Shirfu said, so we're back to square one. After the two stopped talking, Professor Kazair said, our current idea is to create a key to open the seal, then use this key to lure the person out. After that he looked at Dake. Dake thought for a bit and said, so this is why you called me here? Professor Kazair smiled and said, yes. We want you to create the key. Dake, let me think about it. Professor Kazair and Professor Shirfu's intentions were very clear. Of course, they couldn't really create a key. At this time, they needed someone to create something out of nothing. Of course, this was a more elegant way of saying it. To put it in simpler terms, they needed someone to spread rumors. Dake was someone who had experienced the explosion of the information age, so he knew more about creating something out of nothing than the two professors imagined. This thing didn't require the authenticity of the rumor, but the content had to be attractive enough. Even if no one pushed the rumor, it could spread spontaneously. On top of that, the thing to pay attention to was to make sure that the cost of spreading the rumor was zero. In order to make the rumor fly, the importance of no cost was sometimes even greater than the content itself. However, in order to make the rumor fly even higher, the content had to be sculpted. Generally speaking, content that was implicated in morality and could make people feel that they were standing on a moral high slope, condemning those below them, or content that could bring great benefits to people, were all good content that could make rumors fly high. Also, if the rumor monger's status was convincing enough, then it could be used as support for the rumor to fly even higher. In this regard, Dake had a natural advantage. It was easy for him to spread the rumor. However, once the rumor was exposed, there would be a crisis of trust. What do I need to do? After a while, Dake raised his head and asked. There were many ways to avoid a crisis of trust. Making the rumor vague or kicking the ball to a professor were both more practical methods. Of course, it would be best if there was a real object. This real object could also be used as bait. Professor Kazair and Professor Shirfu were quite thoughtful. Professor Kazair immediately said, I can make a fake key and store it in a place where it is difficult to obtain. Then you can accidentally leak this information. Yeah, you can just say that you heard it from me. Dake thought for a bit and said, then Professor, why do you want to make a key that can break the seal? To make things difficult for yourself? Professor Kazair shrugged and smiled as he said, that's not important, Dimeng. As long as it becomes popular, no one will care. Just like how no one will think about why there is a treasure map in the labyrinth. Of course, we can't let people think that there is treasure in the secret passage. Otherwise, it will attract people that we don't want to attract. Dake said, Professor, this is very difficult to control. Professor Kazair, that's why we need you. Dake, let me think about it. The matter itself sounded as if it were true. If it was just casually leaked, it might attract people who needed the key. Many stories had similar links. There was no need to be too careful. The key was the word need. However, what if the other party was smarter? After all, the sudden appearance of a key could easily make people doubt its authenticity and whether or not this was a trap. What kind of need could overcome doubt? Why would people still take the bait despite knowing the risks? Maybe we can be a little more roundabout so that the bait doesn't seem so straightforward? Dake couldn't help but ponder. His eyes turned to the magic chess on the table. He suddenly clapped his hands and said, Professor, I have an idea. Professor Kazair focused a little. Tell me about it. Dake pointed at the magic chess and said, deliberately spreading rumors is too obvious. We can use another method. For example, we can copy a magic chess set. Copy a magic chess set? Professor Shirfu was puzzled. What's the use of that? Dake explained, it's very simple. Let the other party see what they want to see. They will naturally take the bait. Professor Kazair had an idea and said, you mean copy Vlad's magic chess set? Dake, bingo. Professor Kazair pondered and said, this might be better than my method. But we still don't know if the other party is coming for the vampire in the secret passage. The probability is actually not high. It doesn't matter. Dake shook his head. Since we've already started, we might as well make it bigger. We also need to know what the vampire Vlad's appearance means. We also need to know who the vampire Vlad is. Even if the person who takes the bait isn't the invisible person, it will be someone related to the person. Only when we truly understand the vampire Vlad's origins can we deal with him. Chapter 296. I'll let you have a handicap of 1 piece. Dake smiled and put away the pieces on the board. He looked at Doran and said, "How about it? Did you bring a piece?" Doran clearly came prepared. He immediately took out an exquisite chess box and sat down across from Dake. Seeing that the two of them were really going to fight, the little fatty Pitan hurriedly called his classmates over to watch. In a short while, they had surrounded the area. This was the first time the first-year students had seen Dake play chess so leisurely in the common room. They couldn't help but be curious. At this time, both sides had already placed their pieces. They started with 3 pieces. Pieces were divided into levels 1 to 2. Only level 1 pieces could be placed in the beginning, but as the game progressed, players could increase their levels through certain rules. Once a player reached level 2, they could place level 2 pieces. Once a player reached level 3, they could place level 3 pieces. Dake's first 3 pieces were 3 level 1 goblins with the binding aura. They were obviously taken from Professor Kazair. Remember, https://m, VIP can't you? VIP Doran's first 3 level 1 lizards were strong attack type. From the way they played, Dake was clearly a novice. While Doran's skill wasn't necessarily high, he definitely had a lot of experience. If his opponent wasn't Dake Dimming, most people would probably think that he would win. Doran himself seemed to think so as well. After a few moves, he was completely sure that Dake was a true novice. He couldn't help but be secretly delighted. The chance to defeat Dake was today. If he really won, he could brag for a year. At the beginning of the game, Doran used his understanding of the game to gain an advantage. He even succeeded in rolling a snowball. On the other hand, Dake's pieces were killed one after another, and he was in danger again and again. But when everyone thought that Doran would smoothly win, Dake finally met the specific conditions and raised his level to level 3. He began to place level 3 pieces, and the situation was instantly reversed. A few minutes later, Doran looked with a pained expression at Vlad, who was stepping on his own castle. He couldn't help but say, "A whole 3,000 attack and defense. You, Vlad the vampire, have no morals." Dake smiled and picked up the chess piece, Vlad the vampire. Intentionally or not, he revealed the bottom of the chess piece, revealing the authentic coat of arms that Professor Kazair had carefully copied. A few students who were also surprised by the strength of this chess piece immediately shut their mouths. Ever since the Magic Chess Guild started selling new chess pieces, almost no one played the old version of Magic Chess. Although the new version of Magic Chess lost its fairness due to the difference in the strength of the pieces. However, wasn't the purpose of spending money to draw chess pieces to break the fairness and crush the opponent? If one spent a lot of money to buy a rare and powerful chess piece, but was unable to gain any advantage on the chessboard, then who would spend money to buy it? So don't blame the chess pieces if you lose. You can only blame yourself for not spending enough money. You let me win, you let me win. Dake placed the chess pieces into the box one by one, and closed the chessboard with a smile. Going too far is as bad as not going far enough. Since Vlad the vampire had already made his appearance, there was no point in continuing. Stopping in time was the best way to prevent the ship from capsizing. That's why we'll stop here today. How about another round? Doran stared at Dake, wanting to take revenge. However, Dake didn't give him the chance. After the chessboard was tidied up, Dake leisurely returned to the dorm, leaving behind only the legend of the invincible vampire. After he left, the students immediately started discussing. A full 3,000 attack and defense points, an abnormally powerful sure-kill skill. If it wasn't for the anti-counterfeit emblem, many people would probably subconsciously think that it was an unofficial pirated chess piece. Too strong. Where did Dake get this rare chess piece? It can't be that he drew it, right? Doran frowned. Pittman said. Under normal circumstances, the possibility of him drawing it is the highest. After all, whoever drew such a powerful chess piece probably wouldn't want to sell it. Doran. So why can't I draw it? Pittman. Input equals output. Maybe he drew more? I remember that during the opening ceremony, Dake received a full 10,000 credits as a reward. Doran frowned. That's not something we can compare to. Pittman curiously asked. Doran, do you remember why he received the 10,000 credits as a reward? Doran recalled. Let me think, it was during Halloween and the long holiday. I think he saved someone? Pittman. Who did he save? Doran. I don't know. The discussion between Doran and the others gradually heated up. After returning to the dorm, Dake had already put this matter to the back of his mind. He and the professors were discussing a relatively long-term plan. They didn't plan to produce results in a day or two. Therefore, his focus was still on the compilation of the mathematics textbook. 2 days later. One day, when Dake entered the classroom, Luobot suddenly asked him, Hey Dake, I heard you have a very good magic chess piece? Dake knew that his plan had already begun. The news that he had a chess piece called Vlad the Vampire had already spread from the noble house to the night school. It would gradually spread from the first year to the senior year. Then it would spread from the senior year to the entire school. Part of this matter could be considered to be completed. Dake winked at Luobot and said, You know the vampire chess piece. Luobot was slightly startled, but Dake had already walked past him to the other side of the classroom. White elbowed him and whispered, Did you hear that, Luobot? It's just as I guessed, it's Vlad the Vampire. Do you know what this means? Luobot came back to his senses and was somewhat angry. The Magic Chess Guild would never sell a chess piece with Vlad as the prototype. Dake is using a pirated chess piece. How could he do that? White. Dake is different from us. He doesn't have the spirit of a chess player. He's just a beginner blinded by victory. Luobot pondered for a long time, then suddenly raised his head and said, No, I must let him know that what he's doing is wrong. White, how? Tell others that he's using pirated chess pieces? Hey, Professor Shi-Erfu warned us not long ago that we can't reveal anything about Vlad. No, it has nothing to do with Vlad. Luobot clenched his fists and said decisively, I want him to know that the strength of a single chess piece can't determine the outcome of a game. Magic chess pieces can't be desecrated. White. You can do it, dear friend. Luobot. So, dear friend, I need your support. White. I'll do my best. Luobot. Okay, then lend me your credits. White. Luobot. I only have 21 pieces from the old version. If I want to win, I need to buy new pieces. White. But Luobot, Valentine's Day is coming. February Xingmalian was still on the tail of winter. There was no warmth of winter leaving and spring coming. Professor Mitya made a small prophecy during Wednesday night's astronomy class. The little magisters all knew that snow would fall on Valentine's Day. They didn't know that a timely snow foretells a good harvest, but they were happy about the world wrapped in silver. If combined with the special season of Valentine's Day, it would be as romantic as Christmas. If they confessed to the person they liked on that day, they might be blessed by the goddess of winter. Hey, wake up. It's already spring. In the history of magic class the next day, Professor Ryan Hux deliberately talked about the harshness of marching on a snowy night and the disastrous defeats of several battles due to the heavy snow. This forcibly diluted the little magisters' expectations of Valentine's Day. But among the Xingmalian, there were still various rumors about it. Excluding the cold and inconvenience, heavy snow always gave people the impression of pure white. When snow and love were linked together, there was a kind of natural purity. There was no utilitarianism. There were no impurities. There was only pure love. Young boys and girls of this age were always easily immersed in the emotions they created. In the name of cherishing the present, they didn't think about the continuity of the future. But when he thought about it, perhaps this was what youth was like. February 9th, Friday. A week seemed to have passed by just like that. Dake was busy writing and revising the mathematics textbook. He didn't even have much time to pay attention to the influence of the vampire magic chess piece. Not to mention the snow and Valentine's Day. He drew bliss 3 times on the night of the 4th, 5th, and 6th. He drew pride twice on the night of the 7th and 8th. Finally, the indicators of bliss and pride were lowered to a somewhat acceptable level. And tonight he was going to draw bliss again. His goal was to keep pride and bliss at around 100 points. But even so, Dake also felt that the atmosphere of love was growing with each passing day. In the blink of an eye, it seemed like everyone around him was secretly doing something. The Valentine's Day of this world was subtly different from his previous world. People made a clear distinction between Valentine's Day of February 14th and White and Green Man's Day of March 14th. Men and women would give gifts to the person they liked on this day to express their love. If your love was two-way, you might receive a gift from your lover at the same time you gave a gift. But if your love was one-way, you would have to wait a month to receive a reply. This 1-month gap contained a kind of kindness. It expressed the value of love and hoped that people would think more carefully, instead of making impulsive decisions on the spur of the moment. At the same time, it also prevented the awkwardness of an immediate reply. If you gave a gift, it would be a subtle confession. If you received a gift in return on White and Green Man's Day, it would be a positive response. For reserved people, this was a very good way to express their love. February 14th this year was on Wednesday next week. Therefore, from today to Sunday, students could go to Travelers Street to buy gifts. On Friday afternoon, the crowd poured into Travelers Street like a tide. Dake stood at the window on the 2nd floor of the castle and looked down. It was as if he was looking at people going to the festival market. He had a subtle feeling in his heart. He had enjoyed his youth during Halloween and Christmas last year. But during this period of February, he was really a little tired. Occasionally he would think about who would give him gifts and how he should respond. I've already clearly rejected those first-year students at Christmas. They shouldn't give me any more, right? Similar thoughts ran through his mind. Dake took one last look at the still surging crowd and turned to walk towards the tower of the aristocrat house. At the same time, White, Luo Boat, Deanna, and Luo C all followed the crowd into Travelers Street. White was still thinking about whether to give a gift on Valentine's Day. If she wanted to give a gift, should she buy it directly or make it by hand? Chocolates bought in the store were beautifully packaged and tasted better. Handmade ones might be rough, but they were more sincere. White didn't think that he would get a positive response. But where there was sincerity, there would be a way. Giving a gift on Valentine's Day would at least make his senior Panduola notice him. If he gave a gift every year, maybe it would change something? Tonight, there would be a gathering in the Marine Biology Research Department. Maybe he could get some tips from his seniors. He lowered his head and thought. He didn't notice that Luo Boat had already begged all the gods he knew. Luo Boat, who didn't have a romantic partner, was of course thinking about how to draw a rare and powerful magic chess piece. 1 twisted egg could open a magic chess piece. The price wasn't expensive. The price in the academy was 1 credit per twisted egg. Converted into holy coins, it was 16 holy coins. However, if one wanted to draw a good magic chess piece, the required credits would not be a matter of 1 or 2 points. But in order to wake Dake dimming up, Luo Boat was willing to pay. He had wanted to buy it for a long time. He finally found a reason. Deanna and Luo C walked hand in hand into a chocolate workshop. Today was the last day of the class, and Diana still couldn't make edible chocolates. But it didn't matter. Luo C could make chocolate that wouldn't look shabby even if it was sold in the shop. Every time this happened, Deanna would feel lucky to have met Luo C. "Have you heard?" Deanna said mysteriously as she was learning how to make chocolate. Luo C stopped and asked curiously, "What?" Deanna leaned over and whispered in her ear, "I heard that if a person doesn't have a lover and is looking for a partner, fate will guide him to marry the first person he sees on Valentine's Day." Luo C was surprised. "Is there such a thing?" Deanna was a little proud. "I heard this from a senior in the common room. Let me tell you, she is very bold. She said that she would wait at the door of a senior in the wee hours of the morning. Hee, she's not shy at all. Oh right, should we go and wait for her too?" Luo C tried to hold back her laughter. "I think it's okay." Deanna poked her cheek with a finger stained with cream. Stop laughing at me. I'm not going. Behind them, the girl with the pink doll hair was secretly listening. 2 in 1. Chapter 297. The Shungmalian Library. As usual, Panduola was on duty at the front desk. There were surprisingly few people in the library this afternoon, so she seemed to be quite free. I see, so this is the origin of Valentine's Day? She carefully read the words in The History of Valentine's Day, and seemed to have understood something. This world's Valentine's Day originated from a certain god of love. It was a male god. His beauty rivaled that of a goddess, and his voice could make people intoxicated. But love wasn't something that could be exchanged for with a beautiful face and a beautiful voice. That male god fell in love with the pure shepherdess, but the shepherdess only had eyes for the flute-playing boy. He pretended to be a passerby and got close to them. Although the shepherdess and the flute-playing boy warmly welcomed him, he couldn't get close to them at all. Website. https://m. Vipcanshu. VIP. The sun was setting. He could only leave in loneliness. But before he left, in return for their hospitality, he left precious gifts for the shepherdess and the flute-playing boy. The shepherdess received a flute with magical powers. The flute-playing boy received a talking sheep. That night, the shepherdess gave the magical flute to the flute-playing boy, and the flute-playing boy gave the divine sheep to the shepherdess. The god of love hidden in the sky side left his final blessing, and finally left. Later, the flute-playing boy became the king. The shepherdess became the empress. The two of them decided to exchange gifts as God's Grace Day, to thank the god of love for his grace. Later, God's Grace Day evolved into the current Valentine's Day. The tradition of exchanging gifts was also passed down. Life is truly filled with danger. Panduola shook her head slightly. Love Goddess Swallow's magic flute, and Love Goddess Swallow's divine sheep, were both very famous mystic ritual cards, as well as fatal traps. Among them, Love Goddess Swallow's magic flute. S effect was control. Love Goddess Swallow's divine sheep. S effect was charm. She turned to the next page. Panduola's gaze gradually drifted away, and the words on the book became blurry in her vision. Her thoughts drifted far away. Love, what exactly is it? Love, what exactly is it? In the reading room, Aima repeatedly pondered over this sentence. She was still affected by the surrounding atmosphere, and her emotions were in a mess when Valentine's Day was approaching. But she had no intention of giving gifts to anyone. Occasionally, he would wonder if he would receive a gift from someone. How should I respond if I receive it? Some people didn't think much of love. They thought that the feeling of weightlessness was love. Some people placed more importance on love, and felt that a choice made easily could not be considered love. The former enjoyed a moment of love. The latter yearned for a lifetime of love. Saraswati was puzzled by the fact that the students around her could easily determine the target of the chocolates. However, she would not obstruct him because of this. At dusk, the students who had spent the afternoon in Traveler's Street returned one after another. After spending a lot of credits, Luobot finally got the magic chess piece he wanted. Then he selected some of the original fixed chess pieces, and successfully created a set of barely usable chess pieces. He needed a day to familiarize himself with this combination. Then on Sunday he would issue a challenge to Dake Dimung. Although his set of chess pieces might not be very strong, he believed that he could use his skills to make up for the difference in the strength of his pieces. Moreover, from what he heard so far, Dake did not have any outstanding chess pieces apart from the pirated Vlad the Vampire. Therefore, as long as he could not raise it to level 3, Vlad the Vampire could only lie quietly in the chess box. Luobot could already see his victory. Is there really any meaning in doing this? White accompanied Luobot for the entire afternoon. In the end, he could not help but play a few consecutive tens, and barely managed to put together a set of chess pieces. Of course there is a meaning. Luobot answered very decisively. However, if he was asked what the meaning was, he would probably not be able to answer. Although he also had a set of chess pieces, White did not plan to play against Luobot. When he returned to the castle, he parted ways with Luobot, and rushed to the meeting place of the Marine Biology Research Department. It was an unused classroom on the 4th floor of the castle. They temporarily used the classroom as a temporary meeting place. Valentine's Day was not a good day for the Marine Biology Research Department. They often acted as a backdrop during Valentine's Day. Among the 16 members of the church, only White was worried about whether or not to send a gift. However, they did not feel jealous because of this. Instead, they were very happy to give him advice. Perhaps it was because doing this would make them feel like they were also participating in Valentine's Day. Betty Murray, who was wearing an eel skin case, was a 4th-year student from the Magic Academy. She was Panduola's classmate. White obtained a lot of information about Panduola from her. However, the more he knew, the more he could feel the excellence of Panduola. White felt more and more that he was right to fall in love with such a person. After chatting for a while, White said nervously, "Although I have thought about sending her a gift every Valentine's Day, if I really do that, will she be disgusted?" Betty looked at his mood and said very seriously, "I don't think so." "Is that so?" This was obviously the answer White wanted to hear. His voice came from the sponge case, sounding a little happy. However, Betty immediately said, "It's like this. She probably won't notice that you are sending her a gift." White was stunned. "Why?" Betty said, "Because every Valentine's Day, the gifts she receives can fill an entire cabinet. I don't think she'll notice you from that pile of hills." "White." The senior wearing the pufferfish case said in a low muffled voice, "It's too difficult to target the silver dragon girl right from the start. How about we change the target?" Squid Sea Keat subconsciously retorted, "Love is not something you can change whenever you want." During the heated discussion, White had a bitter expression on his face. After returning to his dorm, he played magic chess with Luo Boat the whole night. In the tower of the House of Nobles, Dorm 201, Dake Dimming exhaled and put down the pen in his hand. The progress of the mathematics textbook was smoother than expected. Perhaps it would not be long before it was finished. He stood up and stretched his body before sitting down again. For the next 2 days, he was going to give it his all. That night, Dake drew bliss again. The next Saturday he did it again. At this time, the insect tree had stored 0.5 points of greed, 3 points of pride, and 7.5 points of bliss. At this point, the allocation for the month had been completed. Pride and bliss were both controlled at around 100 points. Greed was below 100 points. The pride stored was enough to create a new pride too. 7.5 points of bliss was enough to cultivate a fruit of bliss. However, since he had already cultivated 2 fruits of bliss, Dake chose to store the great sins for the time being. February 11th, Sunday. After a full day of hard work on Saturday, the framework of the first-year mathematics textbook was completed. 80% of the key content was filled in. He was mainly responsible for writing the knowledge points and examples. The expansion and supporting exercises were Professor Li Li's task. If everything goes well, I should be able to finish it in 1 day. Dake could not help but rub his eyebrows to relax his tense nerves. Writing the textbook was a tough job. For someone like him, just writing down the content in his memory was already so difficult, let alone the original creator. I just hope that this textbook can actually help the first-year students. Today, Dark discovered that he actually had a sense of mission. He could not help but smile and continue to work hard. However, at noon, just as he finished eating the lunch brought by the little devil, he heard someone knocking on his door. "Who is it?" Dake opened the door and was surprised to see Doran standing outside. He could not help but ask, "Is there a problem?" Dolong mysteriously fished out a letter from his bosom and handed it over. Dake's face suddenly darkened. "If I remember correctly, it's not Valentine's Day yet, right?" Doran paused and quickly said, "What are you thinking? This is a letter of challenge." Dake suspiciously said, "It's yours." Doran, "No, you'll know once you read it." "Okay." Dark took the letter of challenge and closed the door behind him. He turned around and walked to the desk, preparing to sit down and read the letter. Dolong was locked out of the room. "Took it." The little fatty Pitan appeared out of nowhere. He looked quite excited. The only thing missing was the word fun written on his forehead. Doran hesitated. He took it, but will he go? To be honest, he looks very busy. Pitan was not confident. Dake doesn't look like someone who would care about this kind of provocation. But I already sent out the news. Doran was shocked. When? Pitan, just now. After Dake sat down, he used a paper cutter to open the envelope and took out the letter inside. Just as Doran said, this was not a love letter for a confession, but a letter of challenge. The sender was Luoboat Broheim. The location of the challenge was in the classroom of the dual class. As for the content of the challenge, magic chess, 2 out of 3 wins? Dake glanced at the magic chess that had been collecting dust in the corner of the table for a few days, and realized that a fish had taken the bait. But why was the fish that took the bait Luoboat? Dake did not think that the invisible man would be Luoboat. Wait, Luoboat and White both have a history of night wandering. And in Harry Potter had an invisibility cloak. White Gouda, don't tell me he has one too. Thinking of this, Dake could not help but hesitate. If the invisible man was really White, what he and the professors did was far too cautious. In the past, if Vlad the Vampire's incident did not happen, even if the professors found someone wandering at night, they would only treat it as a student's violation of discipline, and would not pursue the matter. But Vlad the Vampire's incident did happen, so it was not wrong to be cautious. No matter what, since the fish took the bait, I have to go take a look. Dake thought for a bit, took the magic chess, and familiarized himself with the chess pieces and rules. Luoboat's challenge was at 7:30 p.m. after dinner. Since he decided to accept the challenge, Dake certainly did not want to lose. He was a professional at cramming. The sun was setting in the west, and the clouds in the sky were like rolling waves, rolling orange and gorgeous like a rainbow. When the sky was about to turn dark, Dark picked up the box of magic chess and walked out of the dormitory like a lonely warrior who had rushed to the exam after cramming for 3 days. He walked down the stairs and walked into the common lounge. The spectators, led by Doran and Pitan, had been waiting in the common room for 3 years. When they saw him walk down, they suddenly boiled with excitement. He's here. He's really here. This is going to be fun. His opponent is Luoboat, right? Only Luoboat is good at magic chess. Dake is a beginner, and the only person he's played against so far is Doran? And he won. It's Doran after all. What's going on? It's not shameful to be bad at magic chess. He's anxious. Don't keep using him. The reason why Dark won was because of that, Vlad the Vampire. That chess piece is too strong. I've always felt that this game was unfair. Yeah, for Luoboat. Dark had never thought that there would be a day when he would be reduced to a melon eater. Maybe this was what it meant to be a melon. He simply waved at Doran and Pitan, and said with a smile, "Let's go together?" Doran immediately said happily, "Let's go together." Then, a group of first-year students mixed in with a few upperclassmen walked out of the tower of the aristocrats' courtyard, majestically heading for the dual classroom. When they arrived, they found that a large group of people from the Knights Academy were already in the classroom, ready for battle. Luoboat was sandwiched in the middle with a dry smile on his face. Originally, he only wanted to find Dake to decide the victory by himself. But he didn't know what went wrong, and everyone in the Knights Academy knew about it. As a matter of fact, the first-year boys of the Knights Academy were all gathered here, waiting for their opponents to arrive. With so many people here, there were many things that couldn't be said. Luoboat originally wanted to use this game to tell Dake that relying on pirated pieces to win wouldn't last long. His intentions were definitely good. But information related to Vlad the Vampire couldn't be said. So he couldn't tell others why he thought that the piece was pirated. Moreover, he didn't want to mention this to others. Damaging Dake's reputation wouldn't do him any good. He would even blame himself for this. After all, Dake was his savior. And 3 times. But now, the arrow was on the string. He had to shoot. Chapter 298. They're here. White Gouda leaned on Luoboat's shoulder and whispered into his ear, He could keenly feel that something was wrong with this game from a certain point onwards. Luo Boat wasn't representing himself, but the entire group of first-year boys. For a long time, the aristocratic academy's first years had relied on Dake Diming's existence to suppress the Knight Academy. Not long ago, they had taken a big bite out of the newcomer competition. Many people didn't say it out loud, but they remembered it in their hearts. The students of the Knight Academy were famous for their bravery and competitiveness. Even if they knew it was impossible, they would still do it, let alone when they had a clear chance of winning. Luo Boat's magic chess level was at the top of the first years. Facing a short-lived newbie like Dake was like the 6th grade bullying the 1st grade. No matter how one thought about it, it was impossible to lose. There were many different tactics in magic chess. A single 3rd-level piece couldn't dominate the battlefield. As long as Luo Boat grasped the advantage, his chances of winning were huge. Remember the URL. MVIP can't you? VIP. Luo Boat, who had high hopes placed on him, suddenly opened his eyes wide. When he saw Dake Diming leading a large group of aristocratic academy boys into the classroom, he knew that Dake had encountered a similar situation. He blinked, trying to get a sense of resonance from Dake's eyes. But he didn't succeed, because Dake was happy to see so many people following him. In order to let Vlad the Vampire's reputation spread, he didn't just want to win. He wanted to win fiercely. With Vlad the Vampire as the core, he wanted to win fiercely. Dake walked into the classroom without the slightest bit of fear from the gathering of the Knight Academy students. He walked straight into the crowd, pushed aside the students in front of Luo Boat, and said to Luo Boat, "I'm here. When do we start?" Luo Boat's jumbled thoughts suddenly disappeared. His eyes brightened and he said, "Now." Dake waved his hand and said, "That's good. I'm in a hurry." It was true that he was in a hurry. He still wanted to complete the content of the mathematics textbook today. But at first, it sounded like a provocation. Luo Boat himself didn't care too much, but the students of the Knight Academy behind him exploded in an instant. Of course, due to the prestige Dake had established among the first-year students, they did not get angry at Dake. Instead, they aimed at the aristocratic academy students behind Dake. It was unknown how many times the boys from the two academies had clashed. Their eyes seemed to be burning with fire, and the atmosphere gradually intensified. It was as if a melee could break out at any time. Dake moved a stool to the other end of the desk, opened the chess box, and took out the foldable chessboard. Luo Boat also had a chessboard with him, but when he saw Dake's chessboard he couldn't help but give up on the idea of taking it out. The price difference between the two chessboards was at least twice. Although Luo Boat had paid nearly 500 credits for the magic chessboard, it naturally couldn't be compared to the two professors. In this opening match, in terms of momentum, he lost by 1 point. Dake asked, "According to the rules you mentioned in the letter of challenge, the winner of 2 out of 3 games wins, right?" Luo Boat said cautiously, "Yes." No matter what kind of competition it was, newbies always had an inexplicable strong luck. He was determined to win this game. Since he didn't want to fail miserably, he naturally had to increase the number of games to increase his margin of error. Good. Dake nodded. No regrets. Luo Boat. No regrets. Thus, the two sides got into formation. Without any nonsense, they began to face off. Meanwhile, Doran, who was behind Dake, and White, who was behind Luo Boat, also looked at each other. If the atmosphere wasn't so serious, the two would definitely have a game on the spot. Boom. As the magic chessboard was activated by magic, a small thundercloud floated above the chessboard, turning part of the chessboard into a minefield that couldn't be passed through under normal circumstances. 2 bridges emerged from the chessboard, passing through the minefield and connecting the two sides. On the chessboard, various terrains appeared one after another. The castles on both sides bulged. At first, it was a simple level 1 castle. As the game progressed and the players reached certain rules, the castles would automatically level up and become more majestic. Dake used the newbie method to play. He took out 3 level 1 chess pieces from the chessboard and placed them in a circle around the castle. This time, he used Fairy of Light as a starting point. The 3 level 1 light fairies, were all priests, and each of them had their own unique healing type Surekill skill. When they were together, they would receive the buff of life sharing. The 3 chess pieces could share the damage. Unless they were all defeated, they wouldn't be killed. Once his HP dropped to a certain level, Dark would be able to use a healing Surekill skill that could be used once per light elf to pull his HP back up. The 3 chess pieces that he got from Professor Shi-Erfu were like cockroaches that couldn't be killed. They were extremely rare among level 1 chess pieces. Just these 3 level 1 chess pieces were enough to make people envious. This was the first time that the students of the Aristocrat Academy had seen Dake use this combination. It's actually a chess piece combination that's much stronger than the 3 level 1 goblins. Doran, who had played against Dake before, couldn't help but twitch his mouth. He suddenly realized that it was no wonder that Dake was so calm. It was probably because he had enough wealth to crush technology and the confidence he had in himself. That damn tycoon. The students of the Academy of Knights immediately realized where the problem lay. Dake Dimming had a huge advantage over them, and that was the huge amount of academic credits. The difference in academic credits led to an overall difference in the quality of the chess pieces. Once this difference in quality broke through a certain boundary, even a god wouldn't be able to deal with it. They couldn't help but look at Luoboat worriedly. Luoboat wasn't a big fan of academic credits. Little did they know that Dake was just a freeloader. Luoboat looked at Dake's 3 light elves, and then looked down at his own 3 level 1 chess pieces. He couldn't help but grit his teeth. He only wanted to curse in his heart. If there weren't so many people watching, he definitely would have cursed it out loud. This was too much of a bully, who said that Dark only had a single, Vlad the Vampire, that exceeded the limit. These light elves couldn't be pirated like Vlad the Vampire, right? From the start of this game, the students of the Academy of Knights, who were originally very confident, had a bad premonition. The students of the Aristocrat Academy, who were secretly worried about Dake's chess skills, slightly raised their chests. So what if he was a gold digger? In the academy, the academic credits that could be used to buy gold were all accumulated by the students themselves. It was the crystallization of their own efforts, a display of their strength. These pure-blooded aristocrats had deep backgrounds, and there was no lack of wealthy people who were good at using their wealth to oppress others. It was a gift from their family, and using it in this kind of chess game would be spurned by others. But in the end, the wealth of the academy was different from the wealth of the academy. In the academy, wealth was virtue. They still didn't know that Dake was a freeloader. In the next game, Dake, who had used the Surekill skill, cramming at the last minute, no longer made low-level mistakes like a pure newbie. Although he didn't use any brilliant skills or tactics, he relied on his steady style and his powerful chess pieces to slightly suppress Luoboat in the early stages of the game. This was completely different from the game between him and Doran. The first-year students of the Aristocratic Academy who had seen him play against Doran couldn't help but feel surprised. Doran himself was like a squirrel with a chestnut stuck in his neck, realizing that his dream of revenge was likely to come to nothing. Was this the progress of a human? Dake shouldn't have played against anyone during this period, right? Could it be that he had been in the dormitory all this time, using his left and right pieces to generate electricity? But no matter how surprised they were, Dake's chess skills had clearly broken away from the shell of a newbie. In fact, the skills and tactics of magic chess were interchangeable to a certain extent with magic chess duels. It was just like how the 36 stratagems of the art of war could be used in many fields outside of war. Dark's profound knowledge and extensive experience also helped him master the way to play magic chess as quickly as possible. The current him and the him from a few days ago could be said to be 2 different people. When Dake's piece took the initiative to occupy the magic crystal mining area on the chessboard and stayed there for 3 rounds, his castle suddenly expanded, upgrading from a simple level 1 castle to a relatively luxurious level 2 castle. This meant that he could already begin to place level 2 pieces. And Luoboat had already fallen into a disadvantageous position. This was something that Luoboat hadn't expected before the game began. But his high level of cultivation in magic chess allowed him to remain calm, and not be shaken by a momentary disadvantage. Immediately after, Luo Boat manipulated his piece to jump into the minefield, causing the piece's damage taken to reach a certain value. Because of this, his castle received a passive upgrade. This decisive move of self-harm caused a lot of discussion among the junior magisters. Luo Boat's high level of skill in magic chess began to gradually reveal itself. The disadvantage in the strength of his pieces was made up for by his positioning and utilization of the chessboard's terrain. On the board of level 2 Go pieces. Although Dake's pieces still had the advantage in strength, the situation gradually fell into a disadvantageous position until it was completely reversed. Luo Boat's moves weren't the kind that made big moves, but rather the kind that was the complete opposite of his personality. He gradually nibbled away at his opponent through little-by-little operations. Evade. Pair. Leverage. Defeat the strong with the weak. Only those who had played against him knew how high his skill level was. For a first-year student to hone his skills in magic chess to such an extent, in addition to hard work and passion, he obviously needed to be above average in talent. If he had been able to spare some of his diligence in studying magic chess, he wouldn't have been last place last semester. Even further, if he could apply his understanding and skills in magic chess to the real world, instead of just being an armchair strategist, he might be able to change from a mentally retarded character to a wise general character. Dake was surprised. As the situation on the chessboard gradually came under his control, that feeling became more and more obvious. This best-of-3 match might completely overturn his subjective impression of Luo Boat. Luo Boat had a brain. The game progressed to the second half of the game. Dake also began to arrange his troops. He constantly used meat shields to block Luo Boat's pieces, thus stacking damage taken. Although the rule of upgrading a castle from level 2 to level 3, by relying on the total damage taken, to reach the target existed, it wasn't easy to do. At the same time, the opponent's castle would also be upgraded from level 2 to level 3 because the total damage taken had reached the target. But before that, Luo Boat had used the method of occupying 3 magic crystal mines at the same time for 3 consecutive turns, to upgrade his castle from level 2 to level 3. He began to place his level 3 pieces first. At this time, Luo Boat encountered resistance. According to his calculations, in order to avoid the appearance of the cheating piece, Vampire Vlad, he needed to occupy and destroy Dake's castle before it was upgraded from level 2 to level 3. Therefore, he had to avoid Dark's chess pieces and try his best to avoid unnecessary attacks. This was to prevent the total damage from reaching the specified value. However, Dake showed great skill in arranging his troops, which was true for a student of his age, so he couldn't advance smoothly. Not to mention all kinds of familiar military strategies, Dake was also a fan of Chinese chess and military flags. He originally had a high level of skill, but now he was only gradually applying it to magic chess. There was a limit to relying on the strength of the pieces. He could only improve his chess skills as soon as possible. As Dake's total damage taken gradually accumulated, Luo Boat couldn't always passively take a beating and not fight back. Finally, after a stalemate, Luo Boat killed some of Dake's pieces, and finally broke through to the front of his castle. However, if he raised his blade, the damage taken by the castle would still be calculated into the damage taken by the pieces, and Dake's total damage taken was only one step away from upgrading the castle. This saber, should I chop or not? Luo Boat looked at the ravenous wolf blade axeman standing in front of his castle, and couldn't give the order for a long time. The surrounding junior magisters who came to join in the fun also couldn't help but hold their breaths. The classroom was so quiet that only Luo Boat's slightly hurried breathing could be heard. Attack! A Knight Academy student couldn't help but shout. Attack! Luo Boat's innate bravery caused a backlash. The ravenous wolf blade axeman raised his blade, and suddenly swung it down. With this attack, the castle lost half of its health. However, Dake smiled. Vampire Vlad, join in. In that instant, Luo Boat's eyes were filled with blood. 2 in 1. Chapter 299. With the appearance of Vlad the Vampire, the situation was instantly reversed. That ravenous wolf blade axeman, who was also level 3, was instantly killed by Vlad the vampire. The corners of Doran's mouth twitched when he saw this familiar scene, but he quickly thought, if Luoboat dares to issue a challenge, he must have some way to counter it. Maybe he has an even more powerful piece. However, Luoboat didn't have one. The appearance of Vlad the vampire directly killed the competition. Luoboat didn't have a piece that could turn the tables. Very quickly, Dark relied on Vlad the vampire to crush the opponent. When he did win, the atmosphere in the classroom changed subtly. Next up was the second round. Remember, https://mvipcanchu. VIP. No matter how hard Luoboat tried, he couldn't reverse the situation. The difference in the strength of the pieces between the two sides completely offset the difference in skill. Dark didn't only have one, Vlad the vampire. The rest of his chess pieces were also rare items that he got from the two professors. When Vlad destroyed Luoboat's castle for the second time, the match was over. Luoboat took a deep breath and stared at the cheating piece. He almost couldn't help but stand up and say it. But Dake narrowed his eyes and picked up the piece. He said softly, "What do you think? I found this piece in the secret passage." Luoboat was stunned. He swallowed the words that were stuck in his throat. He keenly sensed that Dake's words had a deeper meaning, but he didn't understand what it meant. So he asked directly, "When did you find?" White, who was a bit more quick-witted than Luoboat, hurriedly pressed his shoulder and interrupted. "Did you forget, Luoboat? We found it together." Luoboat, "Oh. Dake winked at them, then stood up and said, "So magic chess is really interesting. No wonder you guys like it so much." Luoboat became excited when he talked about how interesting magic chess was. "Of course. It's not too late for you to start getting in touch. How about it? Let's meet again next time." "Okay." Dake shook his head slightly. "But I have to go back tonight." With that, he stood up and began to clean up the chessboard. Victory and defeat had already been decided. The students of the Aristocratic Academy held their heads high in pride. The students from the Knight Academy were dumbfounded. Doran asked curiously, "How is it possible to find magic chess pieces in a secret passage?" Dake said lightly, "Who knows?" He put down the last chess piece, closed the box and said to Luoboat, "Then see you tomorrow." "See you tomorrow," Luoboat replied. He suddenly felt a lot better. Then both sides bid each other farewell. The students of the Aristocrat Academy clustered around Dake as he walked out of the classroom. As soon as they left, they were as excited as soldiers who had just won a battle. The students of the Knight Academy who remained in the classroom were very depressed. Suddenly someone said, "It can't be helped. That vampire's chess piece is too strong." The atmosphere eased in an instant. Then someone sighed. "Yeah, you can't blame Luoboat. After all, it's a chess piece found in a secret passage. It's like a secret treasure." The boys of the Knight Academy spoke up one after another. Some comforted Luoboat, some comforted themselves. In short, they gradually became lively again. As for the comments such as "even if the chess piece's strength is 99% of the reason, isn't Robert at least 1% of the fault?" they were all selectively ignored by the crowd. Surrounded, Luoboat felt like he had become part of a group again. He suddenly felt that this defeat wasn't unacceptable. On the contrary, White seemed like an outsider beside him. That night, Dake declined Doran's invitation to play a game, and quickly returned to his dorm. In short, this game, with the cooperation of Luoboat, achieved unexpected results. Not only did they spread the news of the existence of the chess piece, Vlad the vampire, but they also connected it to the secret passage. Most importantly, it wasn't on the surface, but rather information that could only be obtained through a bit of in-depth investigation. This was a very good result. In short, the bait has been cast. Let's see when it takes the bait. Dake put the magic chess piece in the drawer. He wasn't going to have any more contact with it. For this kind of entertainment product, it was enough to give it a try. Then he calmed down and continued to fill in the content of the teaching materials. The night was getting darker. The light was turning red. Dake didn't feel sleepy at all. He became more and more serious. The cultivation of spiritual power was good for the condensation of one's will. Otherwise, it would have been very difficult for him to maintain such concentration for such a long time. Busy. At some point, the variegated monster had climbed onto the table and poked Dake's shoulder with its tentacles. Dake was a little startled and turned to look at it. "What's wrong?" Busy. The variegated monster yelled again. Then it turned around and picked up the garbage slime behind it and pushed it on top of its head. Dake couldn't help but look up and see that the garbage slime on top of its head was also holding a magic card. That was the magic card Meow Meow. But there was a small copper coin on the side of Meow Meow. A copper coin? Dake's eyebrows jumped. He reached out and took the copper coin from the garbage slime's head. Where did this come from? Dake held the copper coin between two fingers and shone it under the magic light. The copper coin was round with a total of 7 small holes in the middle. The sides of each hole were engraved with lines like stars, front and back. There were traces of rust on the surface of the copper coin. Clearly, it was very old. However, it gave off a very different feeling compared to Ai Ma's ancient gold coins. He didn't know which era it was from. Dake then looked at Meow Meow in the magic card. He suddenly realized that Meow Meow was holding its arms in front of its chest and raising its head high, using its chin to look outside. This was completely different from its usual behavior of glowing when it saw something good. Dake looked at it carefully and suddenly had a thought. Could it be that this is the additional effect of treasure gathering technique? Attract wealth and gather treasure? With this thought, Dake could no longer sit still. He lowered his head and said to the variegated monster, "How did it appear?" Busy. The variegated monster immediately started dancing. Dake took a long time to understand what it meant. It suddenly appeared at its feet when it was taking care of the baby. But it was only taking care of the baby in the dormitory. Of course, there was no such thing in the dormitory. So it really appeared out of thin air? Dake couldn't help but be surprised. That, attract wealth and gather treasure, was actually a type of treasure falling from the sky. In the past, he certainly wouldn't have believed that such a thing could happen. But this was a world where true gods existed. There was the true projection technology that could create things out of thin air. That meant that there were almost unlimited possibilities. Moreover, this was the Shungmalian, an ancient castle that was located on the axis of time and space. He just didn't know what the trigger conditions for attract wealth and gather treasure were. Was it time, place, or was it completely random? If it wasn't in the Shungmalian, could it be triggered? What types of treasures could be summoned out of thin air? These were all points that needed to be carefully studied. But for now, it's better to study the value of this copper coin. It's more reliable. Dake smiled slightly and then summoned Meow Meow. He gave it free time to move around as a reward. Meow. The summoned Meow Meow cried out proudly. Then, without caring about the trash slime that was looking at it expectantly, it started to wander around the dormitory. Cats would always habitually leave their scent in their territory. When the Dilu beast was first summoned, it also patrolled this dormitory immediately. Meow Meow just didn't have the chance. Soon its eyes lit up. It found the one with the Meow Meow sign among the 12 small beds against the wall. There was also a set of bedding on the bed. Of course, that was prepared by Dake beforehand. He had originally prepared 12 sets of bedding and kept 2 sets as spares. Meow Meow was the 11th magical elf. However, after jumping on the small bed twice, Meow Meow's gaze was uncontrollably attracted by the gold and silver decorations placed in the cabinet. A creature like Meow Meow had almost no immunity to round and shiny things. Moreover, this Meow Meow was the incarnation of greed. Meow, it would be great if I could turn those gold and silver objects into pillows. While Meow Meow was trying its best to adapt to the environment, Dake had already discovered the origin of the copper coin in a book beside him. It was an astronomy book that he had borrowed a long time ago, Starry Sky Decryption. After carefully observing the copper coin, he locked onto the book Starry Sky Decryption, with a very shallow impression, and quickly flipped through it to find the page related to it. There happened to be a picture of the same copper coin in the book. The 7 small holes on the copper coin were very iconic. A 7-star coin from the ancient sky capital. Even though the description was only half a page, But this half-page still allowed Dake to feel something. After carefully reading it, he immediately took the 7-star coin to the balcony. Then he opened the window of the balcony and let the moonlight directly in. The bright moonlight shone on the 7-star coin. The moonlight passed through the 7 holes and formed an image on the wall. That image of light was actually a starry sky array diagram. A starry sky array diagram with 7 main stars. It depicted the starry sky of that era. The special symbols engraved in the starry sky gave it mysterious power. According to the records of starry sky decryption, this should have been an anti-counterfeit certification of the 7-star coin. But as the stars gradually changed, this starry sky array diagram also underwent subtle changes. Time and history gave the 7-star coin a mysterious effect. Those who carried the 7-star coin could see the trajectory of the stars more clearly. This meant that it would be a very rare auxiliary tool for divination. Dake's thoughts moved slightly, and he had a slight understanding. This 7-star coin that he had unexpectedly obtained might be able to be used as a material to refine magic elves like the ancient gold coins. But if he looked at the future, he might as well give it to little Ivan to use. Thus, he found a thread and passed it through one of the holes of the 7-star coin. He made it into an accessory, and then wore it on little Ivan's neck. Yee! Ibrahimovic rubbed against his hand and let out a cheerful cry. At the same time, it attracted the attention of the other magic elves. The atmosphere in the dormitory underwent a subtle change. Even Meow Meow, who was rolling around on the small bed, couldn't help but look over and stare at the 7-star coin that originally belonged to it. Its eyes flickered, and it wanted to immediately pounce on it and snatch it back. When it was almost 11 o'clock, Dake stuffed all the magic elves except for Meow Meow into their small beds and covered them with blankets before turning around to sleep. As for Meow Meow, it had already been returned to the magic card. Meow Meow, who wasn't recorded in paradise, had to constantly replenish its magic in order to survive outside for long periods of time. Dake hadn't mastered the dream replenishment magic, so he could only return it. When his breathing gradually stabilized, there was suddenly movement in the dark dormitory. The magic elves lifted the corners of their blankets and opened their eyes one after another. But on this night, the usual battle for the beds didn't begin. The magic elves gathered on the balcony under the moonlight, communicating with each other only with their eyes. They took out the hidden tools and materials one after another, and began the night activity that had been going on for some time. Flickering tongues of fire licked the bottom of the crucible, and a pitch-black paste rolled around in the crucible, as if a witch was boiling a magic potion. Fairy Ivan, who could use ribbons to control tools, and the Dilu Beast, who had nimble hands, were the main forces in boiling a magic potion. The two magic elves who didn't like each other actually chose to cooperate for some unspeakable purpose. The little demon beast flew in the air. It was the supplier of the materials, and believed that it was the one who put in the most effort. The polymorph protected the trashy slime behind it, while the latter held the Meow Meow magic card, and occasionally poked its head out to stare at the flames. The horned eagle man leaned against the corner of the wall with a stern face. Although it was useless from the beginning to the end, it still stubbornly stood its ground. Big Milk Pot wanted to pour its milk into the crucible more than once, but it was sternly stopped by Teacher Kettle. The magic elves' own products were magical creations that would disappear in the end, and couldn't participate in any substantial refining. They had already failed many times because of Big Milk Pot's stubbornness. Instead, the milk of the milkweed was a very good additive. Little Ivan and Chio-Chio Sea Lion stayed together, gesticulating with their hands and feet. In order to not make any noise, they tightly pursed their lips, and often argued until their faces turned red. Fairy Ivan always wanted to add some useless things into the crucible, but it was always slapped away by the Dilu Beast. The moon in the night sky quietly curved the corner of its mouth, revealing a smile of its aunt. The magic elves were busy until the traces of the light of dawn appeared. Only then did they hurriedly stop. After tidying up their things, they quietly went back to their small beds, pretending to be asleep. Not long after, Dake Diming's biological clock urged him to wake up before the alarm went off, and a brand new Monday came once again. Today was the 12th of February, only 2 days left until Valentine's Day. Chapter 300. Perhaps last year's Christmas ball had awakened more first-year students' awareness of both men and women. The hidden undercurrent of Valentine's Day was even more obvious than that of Christmas. Although the exact date of Valentine's Day was Wednesday, February 14th, because Traveler Street was only open on weekends, most of the students had already prepared their gifts. Once the time came, they would bet on their fates. While they were waiting, their thoughts naturally drifted away, and their state of mind during class was not as good as before. During the first class on Monday, Professor Earbook keenly noticed that some of the students were absent-minded. She sneered and used the method of classroom questions to give some of the students a hard time. Therefore, the atmosphere of wanting nothing more than to confess on the spot was severely suppressed. However, there were some things that could be suppressed for a while, but not forever. When Professor Earbook's summoning class ended, the little Magus was suddenly liberated. He once again had the illusion that the sea is wide enough for the fish to leap, the sky is high enough for the birds to fly. Then came the second introduction to magic class. Professor Zainer's amiable style made the students run wild. Even in class, people were whispering about Valentine's Day, chocolate, and flowers. Website: https://m. Vipcanchu. VIP cuteness was originally an extremely private matter, and not many people were willing to share their wishes with others. However, the entire class was still filled with the sound of mosquitoes and ants. Therefore, when the introduction to magic was about to end, Professor Zainer unexpectedly gave them a huge amount of homework. It could only be said that you reap what you sow. Even so, the students did not restrain their behavior. It wasn't until the potionology class started on Monday afternoon that everyone suddenly focused their attention on it. They tried their best to forget about anything else other than class. Potionology. Professor Thompson took out a test tube filled with a pink liquid from the test tube rack. The test tube was stuffed with a wooden cork, and the pink liquid inside was swaying slightly, giving off a strange and eye-catching feeling. Honey Whisper Potion. Professor Thompson stated the name of the potion in a flat tone. For a moment, some of the students thought that they had heard wrong. However, when they asked their desk mates, they all got a positive answer. Professor Thompson had indeed taken out a honey whisper potion during his potioneering class. At the moment when he realized it, he was stunned. All of a sudden, a commotion broke out among the students. It really is the honey whisper potion. Why would Professor Thompson have the honey whisper potion? Is he planning to? Impossible. Who would teach that kind of thing in class? Professor. While the students were discussing, Ai Mameti suddenly raised her hand. Her arm was raised high, as straight as ever. As usual, Professor Thompson called out her name. Ai Ma, what's the problem? Ai Ma immediately stood up and said, Professor, isn't honey whisper potion a forbidden drug? Professor Thompson smiled and said, Not bad. It seems that you have read the list of banned drugs carefully. However, I have to tell you that on January 1st of this year, the list of banned drugs was updated and the honey whisper potion has been removed from it. How can that be? Ai Ma was stunned. This kind of medicine should be banned forever. Yeah. Ai Ma is right. How can the Apothecary Association do this? I want to report this to the Women's Federation. The girls were filled with righteous indignation. The boys whispered to each other. Professor Thompson raised his hand and said, There is a reason why the honey whisper potion was removed from the list of banned drugs. The most direct explanation is that after careful research, the Apothecary Association did not think it was good enough to be listed as a banned drug. Then he said, Impressions are very scary. We often rely on our old impressions to view a person, an object, or an event. However, if we give up on impressions and use dialectical thinking to think objectively, we will find that our previous impressions are wrong. This bottle of honey whisper potion. Can anyone tell me, what is the effect of this potion? Professor Thompson's gaze swept past Ai Ma in the front row and looked at the other students in the classroom. Despite the rowdy behavior of the students before, it seemed like everyone knew about the honey whisper potion. However, when it was time to solve the problem, not a single person raised their hand. The classroom regained its silence. After a long while, Someone in the last row raised his hand. It was not Dake, but White on the other side. When White raised his hand, Luobo looked at him in surprise. Where did White learn about this? How come I didn't know anything about it? However, White did not care about his thoughts and said, Professor, if my memory is correct, the effect of the honey whisper potion in the book should be to make the opposite sex fall in love with you? White Gouda, 5 extra credits. Professor Thompson clapped his hands and signaled him to sit down. White sighed in relief and quickly sat down. He had read about the honey whisper potion when he was looking up the taboo love-related knowledge. He did not expect it to come in handy and earn him 5 extra credits. White was already short on credits, and after spending too much 2 days ago, he was short on credits. Therefore, he was forced to actively participate in answering the questions. However, after Professor Thompson rewarded him with the credits, he immediately refuted his theory. Student Werther, you've given a scientific description of the honey whisper potion. But in reality, the honey whisper potion cannot make the opposite sex fall in love with you. The records of the past are wrong and incorrect. It's the dregs of the old era. Today, the honey whisper potion has been removed from the banned list. This is the best proof. Dark couldn't help but raise his hand. Dake Dimon. Professor Thompson called his name. Dake stood up and asked, Professor, what is the true effect of the honey whisper potion? I was just about to say that. Professor Thompson smiled. I personally believe that the honey whisper potion has no effect on controlling one's emotions. It should be renamed the charm potion. The honey whisper potion does not work on others, but on the user. It increases the user's charm and makes the opposite sex more likely to notice the user. In essence, it's no different from cosmetics. Dark was keenly aware of the problem and raised his hand again. When Professor Thompson nodded, he stood up and said, Professor, from what you said, could it be that the true effect of the honey whisper potion was something you researched yourself? Professor Thompson. It was just a small research project. In other words, the true effect of the honey whisper potion had not been determined. Just as Professor Thompson said, one could not judge a matter based on old impressions. Professor Thompson's own research could be wrong and incorrect. However, most of the students did not have the time to care about old impressions and current research. This was especially true for the girls. When they heard Professor Thompson say that the honey whisper potion could increase one's charm, they immediately perked up. Professor Thompson continued to talk about the honey whisper potion. Then he picked up the pink liquid again. He asked, Who wants to try it out? The students below the stage who had been chattering away immediately shut their mouths and fell silent. After a while, Professor Thompson turned his head to the corner of the classroom. Dake Dimung, you're up. Dake stood up with a pained expression. He obviously did not want to be a test subject for this unknown potion. However, it was not easy to refuse Professor Thompson's call. He could only grit his teeth and walk up to the podium. Not bad. Professor Thompson praised Dake Dimung's bravery. He waved the honey whisper potion in front of Dake and said, Observe carefully. Dake focused and was sure that he had observed very carefully. However, he could not see anything. Logically speaking, the observation was just a procedure. Dake thought for a bit and asked, Professor, is this honey whisper potion for oral use or external use? Professor Thompson. Oral use is good. External use is also possible. Dake. External use it then. Of course, I will respect the student's wishes. Professor Thompson grinned, revealing a row of white teeth. Dake suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. He thought that Professor Thompson was the only normal professor in the first year. Next, everyone, please watch carefully. Professor Thompson tilted the opening of the test tube and gently waved it at Dake. The pink liquid in the test tube poured out and sprinkled on Dake's body. The effect of the potion was instantaneous. It was not, external use is fine. At first glance, Dake Dimung did not change at all. However, there was a mysterious aura about him that made people want to know more about him. He was like the center of a black hole, attracting everything. Regardless of whether it was a man or a woman, anyone who stared at him could not help but be captivated by him. Dake raised his head slightly. His eyes were as clear as the stars, making people unable to look away. In the classroom, the students who were attracted to him could not help but want to rush up to the podium. Ai Ma, who was in the front row, was the most attracted. She immediately left her seat and went up to the podium. She looked at Dake with eyes full of fascination. However, she was about to turn into a cheetah and pounce on her prey. The effect of the honey whisper potion suddenly disappeared. Dake's charm was still off the charts, but it was not as irresistible as before. Ai Ma's front foot came to a sudden stop. It was as if she had been petrified. She instantly froze. Professor Thompson's voice could be heard clearly. If the honey whisper potion is used externally, the duration of its effect will be greatly reduced. Ai Ma. Ha 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 ha. Professor Thompson. Also, if you feel it carefully, you will notice that the honey whisper potion does not have a forceful charm effect. Like I said before, it will only increase a person's charm. It will not force people to like them. If you hate them, you will not be affected. Even if you are affected, you will only need to look away, and you will be able to get rid of it. Ai Ma? Ha ha ha. Dake, who had perfectly cooperated with his performance, returned to his seat and continued to listen to Professor Thompson's explanation of the honey whisper potion's effects and how to make it. The honey whisper potion was a relatively practical potion. The method of making it was not too difficult. However, what was Professor Thompson's motive for suddenly teaching this 2 days before Valentine's Day? Ring ring ring. Professor Thompson's voice rang, signaling the end of the potions class. Professor Thompson immediately stopped his explanation and switched to homework. Then he strode out of the classroom. Dake, after using the honey whisper potion, you became super charming. Deanna suddenly turned around and praised. Dake was stunned. Then he subtly replied, so in Deanna's eyes, I am the type that has no charm? Deanna. Oh Luosi could not help but cover her mouth and chuckle. Dake helplessly said, I have something to do. I'll leave first. After that, Dake packed up his books and returned to the tower dormitory. Then he emptied his backpack and put in the teaching materials that he had been working on. It was a pity. Last night he did not manage to finish the first grade teaching materials. Therefore he had to continue working hard tonight. However, there was an arithmetic class tomorrow. He had to send the teaching materials that would be used tomorrow to Professor Li in advance. Soon, he arrived at Professor Li's office. Knock knock. After knocking on the door twice. I'm coming. Professor Li's slightly hurried voice came from the office. Dake stood still and waited. However, he only heard the voice and did not see the person. So he knocked again. Knock knock. I'm coming. Bang bang clang clang clang. 2 minutes later, still no one opened the door. Dake did not continue knocking. Another 2 minutes passed. The office door opened smoothly. The little fairy with dragonfly wings floated lightly in the air. It looked at the blonde boy with a dry smile. I'm coming. Dake walked in with an unfriendly expression. The office was filled with a sweet and greasy fragrance. However, other than that, it was surprisingly clean. If it was someone else, they might have been able to hide it. Unfortunately, the little fairy was not someone who would tidy up the office for no reason. Dake's heart was as clear as a mirror, but he did not expose it. He sat down on the sofa and took out the teaching materials. Professor Li, I've brought the materials. But as usual, you'll be responsible for the exercises. Professor Li suddenly frowned. Huh? Do I have to work overtime again tonight? Dake, you don't have to work overtime. Professor Li's eyes suddenly lit up. Really? Dake nodded and said, I'll roll up my bedding and kick my feet. I'll never work overtime. Professor Li. Oh, greater than over equal to. You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.